It's Christmas Eve in 1945. George Sauter and his wife Jenny are at their cozy home in Fayetteville, West Virginia, celebrating the holiday with 9 of their 10 kids. Their oldest daughter makes the night even more special, bringing extra gifts for her younger sisters. Good night, kids. The couple heads to bed around 10, but they decide to let the kids stay up late to enjoy their new toys. Little do they know that right then, at that very moment, it's the last time their whole family is together. At midnight, the phone rings. Jenny wakes up and rushes downstairs to answer it. It's an unfamiliar female voice on the other end, and creepy laughter emerges in the background. Jenny says that the person has the wrong number and quickly hangs up. On her way back to bed, she closes the curtains, locks the door, and turns out the lights. She glances at her oldest daughter, who is peacefully sleeping on the living room couch. So Jenny thinks to herself that the kids must be upstairs in bed. Well, she probably should have double-checked that. It's 1:30 in the morning and Jenny wakes up once more. This time, a thick smoke is creeping into her room. Jenny and her husband rush out of the room only to find flames everywhere. Despite being completely shocked by the tragic scene, the couple and 4 of their kids manage to escape. But the other 5 kids are still inside the house. I mean, they must be, right? The thing is, investigators did a brief search of the grounds on Christmas Day, but they didn't find any trace of the kids. And that's strange. You see, the family's home was reduced to ashes in 45 minutes, and a body usually takes 2 to 3 hours to fully disappear in a fire. Could someone have taken the kids? Well, that's one theory. On the night of the fire, one witness indeed reported seeing a black sedan full of people speeding away from the family's house. And the chilling part is that some people reported seeing the kids in a car, at a restaurant, and even in a hotel on the following days. But none of these reports were confirmed. And not even a billboard with the missing kids' photo could give them any clues as to their true whereabouts. A disappearance case as mysterious as this one occurred in 1996 in Wilson County, Texas. Patty Vaughn was described as the kindest person in the world and an amazing mom to her 3 kids. On Christmas morning, she called her sister, all teary, saying that she had had a big fight with her husband. But that was not surprising because they were going through a tough divorce after 13 years of marriage. Later that day, Patty met with her husband at their house so he could celebrate the holiday for a couple of hours with their kids. But Patty had a different plan for the evening. She wanted to drop their kids at her cousin's house and enjoy the last hours of the holiday with her new boyfriend. Unfortunately, she never got to meet him that night. The day after the traditional gift exchange, Patty's boss found her blue Dodge Caravan on the side of a road leading to her home and workplace. But she wasn't inside, and she was never seen again. Have you ever heard of Britain's Roswell? Yep, that went down during the holidays, actually on the day after Christmas in 1980. On that day, 2 officers reported seeing a strange light in Rendlesham Forest, located in Suffolk, England. According to the witnesses, this strange flying object was fast. I'm talking about traveling 60 miles in just 2 seconds. A commercial plane, for example, would fly around 0.28 miles in that same time. So the officers thought that whatever was there, it was clearly under the control of the intelligence. Well, this story is quite well known, but there's another UFO mystery in England that's even more eerie. And it also happened during Christmas. Imagine being woken up at 1:25 on Christmas Day by a loud noise coming from the roof. That can't be Santa Claus, of course, but you start to question yourself. What started as the noise of branches hitting the roof becomes louder and louder until it sounds like giant hailstones, making you crazy. You stick your head out of the window and see nothing. Absolutely nothing. The sound then turns into a hum, then into a faint whisper. What looks like a horror movie plot happened to Mildred Head in 1964 in Warminster, a small town in Wiltshire, England. But she was not the only one. Later that morning, another woman was walking down the street when she was suddenly thrown to the ground by the force of savage sound waves. Around the same time, a couple was surprised by a similar noise. They described that frightening sound as if 5,000 tiles from their roof were ripped off and then put back on again. In total, more than 30 people reported hearing mysterious noises that Christmas morning. That was just the start of what we now call the Warminster Thing, a decades-long enigma of UFO sightings, scary sounds, and cars mysteriously breaking down after these strange occurrences. Over 50 years have passed, yet no theory can fully explain what happened in the UFO capital of the UK. Santa Claus coming down the chimney, 8 tiny reindeer, stockings filled with gifts. This perfect holiday recipe is described in the "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" poem. But there's a mystery hidden in that iconic poem. You see, the verses were first published in a newspaper called the Troy Sentinel on the 23rd of December, 1823. But there was a problem. The poem didn't have an author. This mystery persisted for 21 long years until a language professor from New York City named Clement Clark Moore claimed authorship. Mystery solved? Well, not exactly. A letter from 1879 raises an intriguing possibility. The author of the poem might not be who we think. In this letter, the daughter of a New York poet and farmer named Henry Livingston Jr. says that "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" is actually her father's work. She was too young to have heard the poem when it was originally recited, but the family says that her father read the poem to his kids 16 years before it was first published in the newspaper. But don't get too excited, because this whole story will probably remain a Christmas mystery. The truth is that the alleged author passed away just 5 years after the poem's publication, never once claiming to be the real author. The holiday season is usually a peaceful time of the year, but 1997 was an exception to this rule. It's December 22nd, and Beth Anne Ricketts decides to do some Christmas shopping in the morning. She grabs her black purse and leaves her home in Des Moines, Iowa. She buys gifts for her kids and even decides to treat herself, choosing a special dress for New Year's Eve. Unfortunately, she never got the chance to wrap those presents. Beth Anne never returned home, and a series of strange events unfolded after her disappearance. Later that same day, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a fire broke out in her house. In her bedroom, to be more precise, and the firefighters couldn't determine its cause. On Christmas Eve, TV networks in Des Moines were discussing Beth Anne's disappearance. Shortly after her story aired, her boyfriend called the police and informed them that she wasn't missing after all. According to him, Beth Anne called him saying that she was okay and didn't want to be found. Unfortunately, she hasn't spoken with friends or relatives since that holiday, not even her 2 daughters and her son. And that's weird to say the least. So, her family is still searching for the answers to this mystery. Imagine leaving cookies and milk out for Santa, and he does actually show up, but with a furry companion that is not a reindeer. According to Folklore, Krampus is a big, scary creature with horns and hooves, and he goes out looking for children who've been bad. The name Krampus might derive from the word krampin, which means rotten, or cramp, which means claw. Nobody's completely sure where Krampus came from, but some people think he's been around since before people started celebrating Christmas. Some say that people have been celebrating Krampus since the 6th or 7th century, which is a super long time ago. But there are no writings about Krampus before the 16th century, so solid details about him are still a mystery. There are also theories that suggest Krampus is the son of the ruler of the underworld. Krampus is like the total opposite of Santa Claus. He is this scary mythical creature who looks a lot like half goat and half demon. He has fur all over and sharp teeth. Krampus carries chains, which are believed to symbolize how people once tried to keep bad spirits under control. He likes to shake those chains for a bit of drama. And sometimes these chains have bells of different sizes jingling along. He also brings bundles of birch branches, and he uses them to punish naughty kids. Some folks think these birch branches might have had a special meaning in ancient pagan rituals. If you like to explore such stories, like, share, and subscribe to How About. In some versions, the birch branches are replaced with a whip. Krampus was said to be sometimes seen with a sack or a basket strapped to his back. And that was not for carrying toys or gifts, that was for hauling away bad children. Some say he might take them away for further punishment, or even on a one-way trip to the underworld. Krampus goes by different names in different places, like Black Peter and Klaubauf, to name some. In parts of Europe, people celebrate St. Nicholas Day on December 6th. The night before St. Nicholas Day is what they call Krampus Night. During this time, Krampus performs his spooky tricks to frighten naughty kids. Sometimes he is with St. Nicholas, and sometimes he's on his own. St. Nicholas usually looks like a bishop in fancy clothes, carrying a golden staff. He is all about good kids, but Krampus is in charge of naughty ones. St. Nicholas hands out gifts, while Krampus gives out coal and birch branches. There is also a tradition to offer Krampus a special strong drink made just for him. In 1923, the Krampus tradition was banned by the Austrian government of the time. In the 1950s, the government gave out pamphlets with titles like Krampus is an evil man. But as the 20th century was wrapping up, some people started to get interested in Krampus all over again. They wanted to bring the tradition back, and they did it. It's still going strong today. In places like Bavaria, people are still making their own hand-carved wooden masks to keep the Krampus spirit alive. During Krampus celebrations, people dress up in all sorts of costumes. These characters include Krampus, St. Nicholas, a woodsman, angels, and an old woman. Krampus's costume usually has elements like a furry suit, horns, a demon mask, and hooves. He might have also had props like bells, birch branches, a basket on his back, chains, and a walking staff. Traditional Krampus costumes were made from not-so-animal-friendly materials, but these days they're often made out of cheaper materials, like fake fur and latex. Every year, as Christmas approaches, there's a pretty unique tradition that happens in the Alpine villages of Austria. It's a tradition that's been around for over 1,500 years, and it still gets everyone excited, especially in the Austrian region of Tyrol. Families gather to watch the Krampus parade. In this parade, young guys dress up in fur suits and wooden masks and attach cowbells to themselves. They even ride on chariots with fire. During these festivities, you'll spot Krampus figures and their gang of elves mingling with the crowd. They're on the lookout for innocent bystanders, often older kids and adults. These red-eyed costume folks carry prickly brooms and birch branches. When they spot a target, they chase their victims until they give in. They might even shake chains and whip their birch branches around to make the spectators a little jittery. Most of the people from Tyrol think this tradition is good fun. They're often found munching on roasted chestnuts while enjoying the whole thing. Traditionally, children leave their shoes out and wait. If they've been nice, they find treats in their shoes. But if they've been bad, they might find a birch rod, which is not a fun surprise. Nowadays, Krampus isn't actually dragging kids to the underworld, but he still likes to play some pranks. In Styria, there's a tradition where Krampus gives families birch bundles. People paint these twigs gold and display them in their homes all year long. They serve as a reminder to kids that Krampus is watching, even if they temporarily forget about him. In smaller, more isolated villages, Krampus has other scary companions, like a wild man with antlers. At the same time, there are some cities in Austria where a tamer, friendlier version of Krampus can be seen. He is more like a funny figure than someone scary. In an Italian town, they have an annual Krampus festival in early December. At dusk, the Krampus comes out of an old cave and chases kids. even adults sometimes. He gives them a nudge on the legs to remind them to behave. To calm Krampus down, children and young people have to recite a prayer. There are similar figures in nearby areas. In many parts of Croatia, Krampus is pictured as a demon wearing a cloth sack around his waist, along with chains around his neck, ankles, and wrists. As part of the tradition, when a child gets a gift from St. Nicholas, they also get a golden branch to show their good deeds for the year. But if the kid has been naughty, Krampus takes the gifts and leaves a silver branch instead to remind them of their not-so-great behavior. Krampus can also thank the hype for buying stuff in the 1800s for his growing popularity. Around that time, people were all about trying new things, so manufacturers saw an opportunity to make money off Krampus. It started when the Austrian authorities let go of the control over postcard production. This allowed businesses to produce a variety of Krampus-themed postcards, and they really took off. When mass media like postcards became a big thing in Germany and Austria in the 1890s, Krampus got caught up in the craze. They started making special holiday cards called Krampuskarten. But these cards weren't about spreading warm and fuzzy feelings. The ones that said greetings from Krampus were quite different. Many of these postcards showed Krampus going after children, leading them away or carrying them off in his bag. Not the kinds of cards you would send to your grandma. Some postcards meant for grown-ups showed Krampus as a woman and sometimes with women. Until 2004, most people in the United States probably had no clue about Krampus or those Krampus cards. But then, one art director named Monty Beauchamp put together a book filled with Krampus cards and also set up an art show based on them. It's hard to say if Monty is the main reason why Krampus became a thing in the United States, but ever since, Krampus has become sort of a funny, ironic figure in America. And the real kicker occurred in 2015, when they came out with a big Krampus movie. Not a low-budget one, but a proper comedy horror film called Krampus, starring Adam Scott and Toni Collette. So even though Krampus is pretty new to America, this Alpine legend is like the original Bad Santa who's been around for generations.
Christmas, the season of lights, also has a dark side. Legend has it that Christmas Eve is a time for spirits to stroll the earth. Today, we'll look at scary monsters, mysterious entities, and more. The Yule lads, hailing from Iceland, make for quite a Christmas tradition. In contrast to the charming 7 dwarfs of Snow White, these 13 gnome-like trolls bring a touch of quirkiness to the holiday season. The Yule lads first made their literary debut in a 17th century poem. These playful youngsters, each with their own unique names and abilities, sprinkle a touch of mischief in the 13 days leading up to the grand Christmas celebration. Their cozy home is nestled in a mountain cave, where they reside with their interesting parents. The clan's father is a leisure master and prefers to hang out in the cave. Their mother is a giantess with an unusual craving for adventure. She seeks out mischievous children to join her in preparing a stew. Out of the troll kids, Spoonlicker, for instance, is known for his habit of thoroughly cleaning utensils with his tongue. Meanwhile, Door Slammer engages in door-slamming antics that might remind you of an angry teenager. As for Sausage Swiper, well, the clue is in the name. And let's not forget about the family's feline friend, who is also known as Yule. This furry companion is a giant black cat. It's on the lookout for folks. If it spots children without brand new clothes, the encounter won't end so well for the kids. Wow, that's harsh. The Nisi is a kind of creature that would send shivers down your spine. It's a diminutive bearded figure donning a sinister red cone-shaped hat. These malevolent beings enjoy lingering around farms. Their presence is unsettling as they claim to offer assistance with daily chores. But beware, for their demands are far from ordinary. In exchange for their eerie aid, they want a dread-inducing offering. Should you dare to deny this sinister request, they will unleash a reign of pure evil upon your existence. There's a nightmarish saga known as When the Nisi Got No Butter on His Christmas Porridge. Yeah, that's a real title. This tale revolves around a young girl who dares to tamper with Nisi's feast. She places the butter beneath the porridge, invoking his wrath. The horrifying consequences? He takes care of the farm's prized cow using his powers. Takes care, In Scandinavian folklore, many people know this creature as Tomten, too. Mary Lloyd is here to make you run for your life. It's New Year's Eve, and you're a young whelp. Suddenly, you hear some mysterious knocking at your door. As you swing it open, you're met with a spine-tingling sight. It's a tall, creepy figure wearing a long, flowing cloak with a horse's skull on its head. It's accompanied by a group of people who are chanting something in an eerie way. To make it even more unsettling, the horse skull has fake eyeballs in its eye holes, and its mouth is slightly open. This whole scene scares you so much that you can't even move. Not the vision of sugar plums you'd rather have. And then we have the Karakonkolos, hailing from the lands of Turkey and Bulgaria. Now picture a more sinister version of the elusive Bigfoot. The Karakonkolos lurks on street corners, posing riddles to passers-by. Answer correctly, and you may escape unharmed. But should you fail, you risk being plunged into a frigid slumber, even colder than the wintry night. In other corners of the world, the Karakonkolos revel in trickery, often masquerading as a familiar voice, tricking unsuspecting victims into venturing out into the snow. This eerie boogeyman is said to have originated from the Greek Kalakanzaros, its sinister influence echoing across the land. So, the Kalakanzari in Greece are a breed of goblins. For most of the year, they dwell underground, secretly plotting to bring about the apocalypse. However, when Advent arrives, they emerge into the human domain with sinister intent, sowing mischief and malevolence. These creatures are often described as dark, furry entities adorned with tusks and horns. They're male and curiously well endowed in their grotesque forms. Meet Frau Perkta, a character who comes from Germany and Austria. Now, she may go by different names, like Italian La Befana or Russian Babushka, but her modus operandi remains consistent. During the 12 delightful days of Christmas, she shifts between being a sweet, beautiful Alpine goddess and a mischievous, some say mischievous, wrinkled hag, depending on your contact with her. She's quite the mood ring. If you've pleased her, you might just see a youthful presence. But if you get on her bad side, she's been known to perform a bit of DIY surgery. Frau Perkta is a remnant from Alpine paganism in the early Middle Ages. It's strongly associated with Berchtentag, also known as the Fest of the Epiphany, which happens on the 12th night after Christmas, on January 6th. As for her name, Perkta means bright one, a fitting moniker. Her look is complete with a knife concealed under her skirt. Careful sitting down. The next one is Krampus. His name is rooted in the German term Krampen, which means claw. It's a creature hailing from the eastern Alpine corners of Europe. Legend has it that Krampus takes it upon himself to playfully remind naughty children of the importance of good behavior on the evening of December 5. His methods are imaginative and way above having a chat with little humans. Meanwhile, his kind-hearted partner in holiday cheer, St. Nicholas, rewards well-behaved youngsters the next day during the joyful Feast of St. Nicholas. These traditions trace their roots as far back as the 6th century. Today, many European towns enthusiastically host Krampuslauf, or Krampus runs. People dress up as him at festivals. And for those with a penchant for sending unique holiday greetings, there's the holiday cards option. In an Alsatian legend, there's a story of Hans Trapp. No, not the Von Trapp family. Hans is a local figure known for his extreme greed and lack of moral principles. He resorted to practicing witchcraft and making pacts with evil forces in pursuit of wealth. He faced a dramatic downfall. He lost both his wealth and his place in society. To evade detection, he adopted the guise of a scarecrow and wandered the countryside. At a certain point, he became fixated on the idea of experiencing the taste of human flesh. Oh boy. God recognized that matters had spiraled out of control and struck Hans Trapp with a bolt of lightning. He met his end, yet there are accounts of his spectral return on Christmas. Belsnickel is a character of German folklore. It's traditionally known for its unique role in guiding children toward better behavior. offering an intriguing contrast to the jolly figure of St. Nicholas. The term Belsnickel can be traced back to the fusion of Bels, an older German term signifying fur, and nickel as a nod to St. Nicholas. Belsnickel is known for his visits to children, during which he engages them in friendly conversations and playful inquiries. Based on their responses, he may opt to reward them with a gift or employ a form of discipline, often involving a wooden rod. Belsnickel's origins can be traced back to the Middle Ages. The final touch is Grilla. She is a giantess who is able to sense children misbehaving all year round. She keeps a record of those children and sees them as snacks during Christmas time. Wait a minute, didn't we mention her before? If you ask this question, you're an attentive, devoted Brightsider. We have indeed mentioned her, the mother of the Yule lads. Remember that crowded family with a black cat? Now, Pierre Fouettard was a butcher. He was known for his involvement in the cases of abduction and robbery, leading to tragic fates for children. St. Nicholas uncovered his gruesome acts and miraculously revived the children. In retribution, Pierre Fouettard was sentenced to a lifetime of servitude, accompanying St. Nicholas and managing wayward youngsters. Well, thanks anyways, but I think I'll just stick with Santa Claus. Oh, and the reindeer.
We all know Grinch, the big, fluffy green dude who can't stand our favorite winter holiday. The character was created by Dr. Seuss, and he first appeared in his book in 1957. By the way, Grinch wasn't green in the book. It was black and white. Also, if you're wondering how old Grinch is, he's 53, the same age Dr. Seuss was when he wrote the book. But let's learn more about the character. We all know how the story goes. A furry creature is living in seclusion on a cliff outside the town of Whoville. The citizens are obsessed with the winter holiday and make such a big fuss around it every year, and also a lot of noise. Grinch lives on Mount Crumpet, away from everyone, but can still hear happy people. He's annoyed with joyful citizens, their happiness, and the holidays, so he decides to cancel the holiday. He steals all presents and decorations the night before it. His plan doesn't work quite as planned. The next morning, he finds the citizens singing joyfully anyways. This makes him understand that the holiday spirit isn't about gifts and decorations. So, in the end, he comes around, returns everything he had stolen, and even celebrates with everyone else. The original story from Dr. Seuss, which only takes about 12 minutes to read, got immediate recognition and became a symbol of the winter holidays. There were offers to animate it, but the author was very resistant to animating any of his books, for several reasons. Reason number 1. He didn't want the series to become more famous than his books and didn't want a movie or animation to be the first thing people think of when they hear about his work. The second reason is that Dr. Seuss was super meticulous and he felt like no one could fit his standards. In the 1960s, a guy was continuously approaching him with the idea of animating the Grinch story. The guy was a great animator that was as perfectionist as Dr. Seuss himself, and he broke the ice by sending the author an amazing depiction of Dr. Seuss's famous character, the Cat in the Hat. After some negotiations, Dr. Seuss gave his permission for a TV adaptation of Grinch. 9 years after the book was published, the first animated TV adaptation aired. Dr. Seuss, the author of the book, wrote the lyrics to all the songs in the movie. Also, even though the Grinch was black and white in the book, in his TV adaptation, the director, inspired by the green rental cars he had driven, made him the same green color. We all think this green makes Grinch kinda chic, even though the intention was the exact opposite. Anyway, since then, Grinch was established green. Also in the book, the citizens of Whoville were furry, and they weren't wearing any clothes. They also didn't have shoes, but female residents of Whoville had high-heeled feet, so the cartoon was quite adjusted. The animation was an absolute success. It still sits with 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, claiming the movie to be an ultimate holiday story. The Grinch was named one of the greatest cartoon characters of all time. The word Grinch is now used in everyday language. This is what people now call a grumpy person with an anti-holiday spirit. People wanted more. fans were constantly writing to Dr. Seuss, asking for more Grinch content. In 1977, which is over 20 years after the release of the original story, the author wrote a Halloween film, Halloween is a Grinch Night. The next appearance of Grinch was in the famous 2000 live-action movie starring Jim Carrey. The movie was so exciting that even Queen Elizabeth II herself attended the London premiere in London. The movie got mixed reviews, but it's widely loved by people across the world. And Grinch is one of the actor's most iconic performances. Other actors who were considered to play Grinch were Eddie Murphy and Jack Nicholson. The role wasn't easy for Jim because of the heavy makeup he had to get into every time to become Grinch. The first working day lasted about 8.5 hours. However, rumor has it that the preparation was so long that the actor almost quit the movie, saying that it was too much. Gladly, a solution was found. A CIA counselor was hired to teach Jim suffering resistance techniques to help him go through the makeup process, which was pretty complex. It would take around 3 hours to do the makeup and get into the costume, and an additional hour at the end of the day to scrape the makeup off the actor's face. Jim Carrey went through the makeup chair around 100 times. This is 400 hours or 16 days in total of just sitting still in a chair, doing nothing, and not even being able to itch whatever was itching. The actor said that after going through it so many times, he learned to be the calmest person, no matter what. Still, the way to Zen wasn't easy. The director of the movie decided to support him. One day, he got all the makeup and the costume on too, and spent the whole day on set directing, dressed as Grinch. When Jim first saw the director in the costume, he thought it was a stunt double and got angry, saying that the dude looked nothing like him. Just imagine what it looked like when two Grinches were interacting on set, a taller one and a shorter one. I'm sure that everyone around had a blast. By the way, the fur that is used in the costume is yak hair that's dyed green. The yellow lenses were important so that no one recognized Jim behind the costume and could only see Grinch. Those lenses were the biggest problem and were hurting a lot. At times, Jim absolutely couldn't tolerate them anymore, so in some scenes, he acted without them, and they were added later in post-production with CGI. But what happened to Grinch after the day when he decided to celebrate with the people from Whoville? He probably lived happily ever after there with his new friends, but fans have a theory even about his afterlife. They say that Jack Skellington from Tim Burton's movie is the Grinch in the afterlife. Let me spill some facts. First, Tim Burton could have directed the 2000 Grinch movie, but in the end, the director's chair was given to Ron Howard. Grinch's heart grew 3 times bigger, symbolizing both that he became a better person, but also that his love for the winter holiday supposedly grew big. Supposedly, Grinch loved the holiday for the rest of his life. So if he really became Jack Skellington in the afterlife, it explains Jack's sudden obsession with the holiday. He doesn't remember his previous life, and he doesn't remember the holiday. But he immediately gets obsessed with it because his heart remembers the love and it draws him. But also, both characters have cute sidekicks. Both of them have dogs. Grinch's dog is Max, and Jack's dog is called Zero. Zero can very possibly be Max as a ghost dog. There's no official confirmation or even comments regarding the theory, but it's an interesting suggestion, and if the movie does exist in the same universe, I'd say that it's a perfect way to combine them. There's another fan theory that possibly explains how Grinch got his dog. As we know, Grinch lives on Mount Crumpet, outside Whoville. Every year he gets unwanted gifts from the town that citizens dump in the trash chute. So, some fans suggest that one day, Grinch discovered Max there, who was once someone's holiday present. But it's not the only theory. Grinch occasionally visits the mailroom in the town, so he could have picked up stranded Max somewhere there once. Another unofficial story called The Grinch Meets His Max, published in 1998, tells how the dog got lost on Mount Crumpet, and Grinch found him there and took him home. Both misfits found each other, and that's what's most important.
It's a snowy winter night. You're inside your cozy house and watching a historical movie that takes place during the Middle Ages. As you take another sip of your hot chocolate, you can't help but wonder how the people survived the winter back then. At that exact moment, your TV screen suddenly turns into a portal and pulls you inside. Whoa! You open your eyes to find yourself within the world of the movie you were just watching. A man approaches you and says, "Welcome to my medieval village. I am Bartholomew, and I called you here to give you an answer to your question. First of all, let me tell you that conditions became extremely harsh when the cold arrives, and not just for the northern countries. Mainland Europe takes its share of the brutal weather too. So winter is kind of a slowing down time for all of us. You see, we usually associate winter with old age and poverty because of all the changes that occur in nature during this time. For example, we can't really grow any crops when snow covers all our land. And by the early 14th century, things started to get even worse because we started seeing the first signs of what you may know as the Little Ice Age. Cold temperatures peaked. Weather anomalies and extreme events such as sudden floods or hailstorms started to occur, which added to our agony. Take the winter of 1359, for instance. Across central Italy, the snow rose to extraordinary heights. People had to throw the snow into the streets to lighten up their roofs. And because of that, some towns were completely blocked. Their inhabitants were trapped in their homes for several days. Another example of this is the winter of 1389. The snowfall was so great in the Luzerne region of France that many people's farmsteads and houses were destroyed. Bartholomew notices that you start shivering.
Ah, you were not prepared for this journey back to medieval winters, I see. Let's walk to my home and find you some warmer clothes. As you can see, I'm already wearing a cloak, a scarf, and mittens, which are all made out of wool. I also have boots that are made out of leather from a deer. Still, all these are not really enough to stay warm when one is outside. That's why we usually layer other clothes underneath them all to keep the warmth trapped. By the way, the wool can get heavy and itchy sometimes. So beneath our woolen outer clothing, we wear linen undergarments too. The linen acts as a barrier between the wool and the skin, therefore making things a bit more comfortable for us. It is also easier to wash linen clothes, and they dry way faster than woolen ones. The wealthier ones can line their winter clothing with fur, and us regular peasants sometimes use rabbit and lamb for the same purpose. It's not as glamorous, but still effective. We can also hunt some wild animals and birds with the permission of the Lord. Yet again, the sumptuary laws, in other words, consumption laws, are very clear on who can wear what according to their social standing. Take the 1363 English sumptuary law, for example. It states that the wives and daughters of craftspeople and land-owning peasants were only allowed to wear lamb, rabbit, cat, and fox furs.
You notice a weird-looking hinged metal sphere in Bartholomew's pocket and ask him what that is.
Ah, it's a hand warmer,
he says as he gives it to you.
If we are going to be outdoors for a long time, we bring one of these with us. Otherwise, one's fingers can get numb, you know. Now take a closer look at it, and you'll see that it has tiny holes on its surface. This helps the heat to escape, so that we can warm our hands without burning them once we fill it with hot coal.
That's kinda heavy, you say, and think about how lucky you are to be living in modern times. With just one click from the comfort of your home, you can order Hot Hands instant hand warmers from Amazon, and no coal is necessary. You can even put those inside your shoes to warm your toes, since they're pocket-sized, unlike this metal orb. You and Bartholomew arrive at his house. You realize that he does not take any of his outer garments off.
We keep everything on during the coldest months because the indoor heating isn't always great, he says. As you can see, the fireplace stands here at the center of our homes, and right above it, there is a ventilation hole rather than a chimney, which causes us to lose so much of the heat. Yet again, we don't usually sleep in our outside clothes. Instead, we put bricks and stones in the fire, wrap them in fabric, and take them to our beds to warm the sheets. Wearing our nightcaps all night long also helps. And when we're not sleeping, we usually try to stay close to the fireplace as much as possible. You sure appreciate that hot water bottle of yours more now, right? And you didn't even need to cover it with a cloth, like these folks have to do. It already came with a knit cover for your convenience. And the best part is, it's much softer than a brick, and can be heated in the microwave within seconds. How rude of me. I forgot to offer you something to eat, Bartholomew says. I know I already told you winter means stillness for us, but we still need to put in some work to not starve. There's a lot of preparation to be done in advance to survive these medieval winters. First of all, we start gathering wood for the fire from as early as spring and through the summer. Then there's the food we harvest in the fall. We have to preserve that in a special way, so all will last over the winter months. The same thing goes for meat, too. The methods we use include pickling, drying, and brining. In terms of grains, cereals, and pulses, we dry them out and store them in ceramic or clay pots. We later use them for making potted stews and soups, in addition to vegetables. Basically, everything we can find goes into the pot. The most common foods we eat in our everyday lives include onions, peas, beans, lentils, and herbs such as parsley. We still have to include protein in our diet, though, and we do that by eating cheese, eggs, fatty bacon, or salted pork. In terms of fresh fruits and berries, they are hard to find during wintertime, so we preserve the ones we already picked by the air drying method too. You think to yourself, if only these people had a food dryer at home, their lives would be so much easier. They could use it for all the foods Bartholomew just mentioned, from fruits to meat. Then again, there's no electricity here. I wouldn't want you to think winters are so grim, long, and boring after everything I've told you. We still do plenty of activities to keep ourselves entertained, Bartholomew says. But what? It's not like they can binge watch their favorite TV shows. We play in the snow a lot, adults and children all together. You can see plenty of peasants ice skating on the frozen lakes. To be able to do that, we used to use pieces of polished wood or horse shin bones. But now, we have iron skates too. I need to mention though, here in Western Europe, ice skating is not as common as in Scandinavia. That is because they are more accustomed to snow and cold temperatures. Sledding is another fun activity we do. Then there are indoor games, such as chess, backgammon, and other dice games. Wool spinning and telling stories are also common ways to spend some nice time with our family. Not surprisingly, nobles have more opportunities in the entertainment area too. For example, boar hunting is very common amongst the elite. At that moment, a portal appears at the door. Bartholomew says, "Guess it's time for you to head back, traveler. Fare thee well." In a frosty Canadian park, hidden deep beneath layers of thick ice, scientists discovered a bizarre skeleton they named the Frozen Dragon. The skeleton had been in the frozen ice for millions of years. It took experts decades to work out the species of this strange fossil. It was identified as a new genus of pterosaur. Pterosaurs were massive flying reptiles with wingspans of over 16 feet. Their heads were 3.5 times the size of their bodies. Pterosaurs lived 76 million years ago when they soared above the dinosaurs. Scientists described them as the biggest, meanest, and most bizarre animals that ever flew. The new genus has been named
Cryodragon boreas, which translates to frozen dragon of the north winds. In 2013, a young mountaineer was climbing one of the tallest mountains in Western Europe, Mont Blanc. He noticed a strange metal box poking out of the snow. The mountaineer pried the box open and found that it was filled with precious rubies, emeralds, and sapphires. The climber immediately handed the box to the authorities. It was discovered that the box likely belonged to a passenger on one of 2 flights from India that crashed into the mountain over 50 years ago. The box was valued to be worth over $200,000, and authorities are still searching for the heir to the small box of treasures. In northwest Siberia in 2007, a reindeer herder was on an outing with his sons when he noticed something strange in the ice. The man realized it was a frozen mammoth calf and immediately contacted the local museum. The calf was named Luba and was the best preserved mammoth mummy in the world at the time of its discovery. Luba had been in the ice for 41,800 years and is around 30 to 35 days old. From trunk to tail, the mammoth calf is roughly the same size as a large calf. If you're interested in seeing for yourself, Luba travels to museums all around the world. On the frozen continent of Antarctica, covered in layers of ice and snow, is Mount Erebus, the frozen volcano. The volcano was discovered in the middle of an eruption in 1841 by explorers on an Arctic expedition. The volcano is over 12,000 feet tall and has been active for the last 1.3 million years. Deep within the middle of the volcano is a huge crater filled with large volumes of molten lava. The volcano has occasional explosions, which means it's classified as being in continuing eruption. However, these eruptions are nothing to worry about because they're generally rather small. Back in 1991, 2 hikers were traveling across the Italian Alps when they stumbled across a body that they presumed to belong to a recently lost hiker. The duo trudged back down the mountain to report their unfortunate findings. Once the remains were recovered, it was clear that the body was not recent at all. Scientists determined that the Iceman was more than 5,000 years old and named him Otzi. The discovery was unlike anything scientists had ever before seen because the body was so well preserved. For years, Otzi was studied by scientists who discovered that our ancestors have a lot more in common with us than we ever knew before. Otzi was covered in ink body art. Research done on the contents of his stomach revealed that his last meal was dry-cured meat, similar to the bacon we eat today. Otzi has at least 19 relatives living today, somewhere in Central Europe. Scientists were researching ancient squirrel burrows in Siberia when they came across something interesting. One of the squirrels had hidden away precious seeds deep beneath the ground. The seeds had been encased in ice for 32,000 years. The seeds were for the flower Silene stenophilia, which had long since gone extinct. Amazingly, scientists were able to recover plant tissue from inside the seeds and grow an entire crop of flowers. They've since reintroduced the previously extinct flower to natural habitats all across the world. In 1930, a team of Norwegian scientists sailed around the Arctic Ocean, conducting research on the seas and glaciers. They reached White Island, a dangerous and icy land no human had set foot on before, or so they thought. The scientists were shocked to discover the tip of a small boat sticking out of the snow. Frozen inside the boat, they found scientific equipment and various personal items, including a jacket monogrammed S.A. Undre. They had discovered the wreck of the famous Undre Arctic balloon expedition. In 1897, Swedish explorers, led by Undre, attempted to travel to the North Pole by hydrogen balloon. No one had ever heard from them ever again. People only found out what happened to them when the wreck was discovered 33 years later. It turns out that the balloon had crashed on White Island only 2 days after departing from Sweden. The explorers traveled along the island on a small makeshift boat, but were unable to make it any further. The best preserved woolly mammoth ever found was discovered in an area of permafrost in Siberia in 2010. Scientists named the frozen mammoth Yucca, after the small village near where it was found. Yucca had been frozen for 39,000 years and is thought to have been around 6 to 8 years old. Because Yucca is so well preserved, it has been studied for years and provided new information about mammoths. In 2019, scientists reported that they were able to activate cells taken from Yucca's tissue. Maybe one day we'll have woolly mammoths roaming the land. From looking at pictures and videos of Antarctica, the continent appears to be freezing cold, covered in snow, and flat, except for a few small hills. Scientists believe that too. When studying the Gomburtsev Mountains in the early 2000s, they were shocked to discover that the small rocky hills were actually the peak of a gigantic mountain formation under a mile of snow. Using radar technology, researchers worked out that the mountains are really around 10,000 feet tall and sprawl across 750 miles. This is around the same size as the European Alps, except hidden under tons of ice and snow. At a gold mine in Siberia, a businessman was examining a nearby river when he noticed something interesting in the frost. It was a small woolly rhino calf that was later named Sasha. The woolly rhino has been extinct for 15,000 years. It's thought that Sasha could have been frozen in the ice for up to 39,000 years. Sasha is unique because it's the only full-body woolly rhino to have ever been discovered. Glaciers around the northern Italian town of Pelo have begun to melt. Artifacts from decades and even centuries ago have been discovered pouring out of the ice. Personal belongings from soldiers have been found, things like diaries, photographs, and even love letters. Historians have even uncovered an entire cabin preserved beneath the ice. The cabin was filled with hard metal helmets and clothes. In 1845, Sir John Franklin embarked on an ill-fated expedition to the North Pole. The crew traveled on 2 ships, HMS Erebus and the ironically named HMS Terror. The expedition met with disaster, and both ships were lost to the icy waters. In 2016, the HMS Terror was discovered by a team of researchers. Despite being lost for 170 years, the freezing cold waters had maintained the ship in pristine condition. Scientists described the ship as frozen in time. Dinner plates and glasses were still on shelves, beds and desks were still in order, and even the passengers' luggage appeared to be in good condition. The HMS Erebus was also discovered nearby, but due to changing water conditions, the ship wasn't in great shape. The glacial ice surrounding a mountain passageway in Norway that was notoriously used by the Vikings has revealed hundreds of ancient artifacts. One of these artifacts was a giant unopened wooden box that was welded together. Researchers were beside themselves with anticipation, waiting to open this box. They believed it would be filled with Viking treasures or artifacts that would give us an insight into ancient society. When they opened the box, all that was inside was a plain old beeswax candle. It turns out that this box wasn't actually as old as they thought it was. By analyzing the candle, they discovered that the box dates back to the 17th century. The age of the Vikings had ended by the 11th century. It's likely that the candle box belonged to a farmer who was shipping it from his summer farm to his winter farm to light up the long nights.
Throwing a snowball to your friends, putting a carrot on the snow person of yours, skating, and many more. It's the snowy winter spirit. Here's some facts about snow. Surprisingly, snow can come in different colors. Let's start with yellow snow. If it starts snowing when flowering trees are already in bloom, pollen is in the air too. Besides giving you allergies, it lands on snow-covered surfaces. In this scenario, snow blends with pollen, which results in this suspiciously yellow shade. The snow clouds can carry sand particles too. Yellowish-tinged snow was seen in South Korea in March 2006. The snow got the sand from the deserts of northern China. Pollen is oftentimes harmless, but sand-caused yellow snow isn't that innocent. It's related to air pollution. When NASA's Aura satellite detected this phenomenon, weather officials warned the public about the potential risks of this golden snow. Sometimes the color of the snow looks closer to brown, not even yellow. Certain trees, like oaks, carry a lot of tannins in the bark. These are organic compounds that protect the tree from harmful bacteria and funguses. These tannins can fall to the ground near the tree. For that to happen, it first needs to rain, and then the rain should turn into snow. The moisture makes the tannins run down. Have you ever just laid on the fresh snow and opened your mouth to let those tiny flakes in? How safe is it to eat those flakes, though? In most cases, it isn't. But here's a pro tip for snow eaters. The safest way to consume snow is by choosing a clean and white layer. Get some from the freshly fallen fluffiest part. And now, forget about it. You never know what random show in the street may contain. Blue-tinted snow is the next one on the list. A cloudy day will create darker shadows. Snow absorbs all color wavelengths. Well, almost all color wavelengths. It cannot completely absorb blue. The bottom line is that bluish snow forms due to the weather conditions. I mean, the snowflakes are actually translucent since they're made up of ice crystals. These crystals reflect light. That's why in regular cases, snow appears white to our eyes. Gray and black snow also exist. Here, I'm not talking about melted snow mixed with dirt near the roads. The one I'm referring to is created with the dust coming from the volcano. But it can be created with less exotic soot, ash, or motor vehicle exhaust. This type of snow is dirty. It might have a dusty or oily scent. If its color comes from petrochemicals, then it's probably toxic. The next one is watermelon snow. The name comes from the red and green color of the snow. Unlike other color versions, this one has a sweet and fruity scent. Different kinds of algae and bacteria produce watermelon snow. You would be very lucky to see it because it's seen during summer in alpine and coastal polar regions. The greenness comes from chlorophyll, and the redness comes from astaxanthin. This is sort of a pigment. Fun fact, some animals, such as flamingos, crabs, and salmon, also get their color from that pigment. This phenomenon is super important ecologically. When the snow melts, it mixes into the waters and becomes a food source for organisms. Snow can come in different colors, but also different shapes too. An example would be snow rollers. To me, it looks as if someone is dragging an ice cream scoop through the ground. They are rare phenomenon because they need certain conditions to form. There should be wind, but it shouldn't be too strong. Typically, 30 miles per hour should do it. Yet, it depends on the snow too. It should be snowing, and how powerful the snow falls is another issue. Snow rollers occur in open prairies or hills with no obstacles like boulders or trees. It's a combo of two separate layers of snow. The first layer is the pre-existing sheet that crashed on the ground. The second one is a fresh layer of fallen snow. Imagine snow running down from the top of an ice rink, which doesn't hold on to what's under. Then, the wind carries some snow that is sticky enough to hold on to the things on its way. As the roller moves, it continues growing. If it's windy and there's an opportunity for rolling down a hill. Now, I want to move on to other cool facts about snow. For instance, its silence. Do you know how freshly fallen snow absorbs sound? Especially if you live in a busy city, you realize it's the quieter ambiance. It literally absorbs sound waves. Think of it as a commercial sound-absorbing product. Things change when it melts and refreezes. Then, the ice reflects sound waves. As a result, sound travels further. Plus, it gets clearer. It's not just us enjoying the snow. Apparently, some monkey species love it as much as we do. Japanese macaques, or snow monkeys, also make snowballs and play with them. Young macaques especially get attracted to snow. They steal one another's snowballs, then fight to get them back. Snow? Blizzard? What else? I can count some words related to snow, but the Inuit, for example, has dozens of words for snow. And Scots has 421 terms related to the snow. For instance, skelf is a large snowflake, and unbrack means the beginning of a thaw. From one point of view, there's the cold and the risk of hypothermia. From the other point of view, animal burrows or human igloos. We associate snow with cold, but it warms you up. Since snow consists of above 90% trapped air, it's a perfect insulator. We talked about snow itself, but what about snowflakes? The shape of a snowflake is bound to the air temperature around it. Researchers examined snowflakes and found out that long, thin needle-like ice crystals form at around 28 degrees Fahrenheit. They also investigated other ice crystal samples taken from different temperatures. The flakes appear to be flat and plate-like in lower temperatures, such as 23 degrees Fahrenheit. The snowflake can also appear with 6 arms, or a dendritic structure as ice crystals, and that again depends on the changes in the temperature surrounding each snowflake. Maybe you heard the saying that no two snowflakes are identical. A catalog of snowflakes supports this theory. One chemistry educator detected more than 30 different types of snowflakes. They are classified as column, plane, rimmed, irregular, and so on. The reason for all this variety is the path each snowflake makes to fall to the earth. Each one of them faces a tiny bit of different atmospheric conditions on its way to the ground. All of them have 6 sides, that's for sure. But in 1988, a scientist found 2 identical snowflakes. Turns out they can be identical. Snow can be seen in deserts too. I know it sounds super contradictory. We're accustomed to thinking about smoking hot sand, cactuses, and nothingness from a desert at first glance. In Death Valley or the Sahara Desert, snow is occasionally seen. In fact, in January 2022, some parts of the Sahara Desert got covered with a white blanket. It's not unlikely to happen all the time, but it's not impossible at all. You see, on some nights, the temperatures in the desert get low. Snow needs 2 things to form: cold temperatures and moist air. Sahara put a tick on both of these conditions. Bonus fact, how long is the tallest snow figure? In 2008, Bethel town residents in the US united their forces with the people of surrounding towns to break a world record. The snow person was 120 feet tall. It took them more than 1 month to finish creating the figure. The Statue of Liberty was only a few inches taller than this figure. When we see a strong snowstorm, we call it a blizzard. That's not always so. You see, a snowstorm should meet some qualifications to be classified as a blizzard. For instance, the wind should be at least 35 miles per hour. Plus, the snow must decrease the visibility to a certain mile for 3 hours at the least. Otherwise, the snowfall can be named a snow squall or a snow burst.
Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabra, Mothman, and other similar creatures are called cryptids. The pseudo or fake science that studies them is cryptozoology. But every year, real science refutes the existence of these beasts. So let's find out how some cryptid myths have been debunked. Let's start with one of the most famous cryptids, Yeti and Bigfoot. These 2 creatures are almost the same, but legends about them appeared in different parts of the world. Yeti is a big guy with white fur. Stories about it appeared in Nepal several hundred years ago. Bigfoot is a mythical creature of North America, specifically the Pacific Northwest, and legends about it appeared in the 20th century. Many people believe in the giant furry creature similar to a bear and a primate at once. Still, no one has ever presented objective evidence that this beast exists. You can find many photos of footprints that allegedly belong to Bigfoot or Yeti, but most are hoaxes. People like not only to believe in fantastic stories, but even to create them. So, to create traces of Bigfoot, someone made a large footprint of clay that had similarities with the human foot. The hair and DNA samples found in the woods, besides the prints, were of artificial origin. It was synthetic, or the hair of deers, bulls, and bears. Oh, and do you remember that famous video of poor quality with a Bigfoot? Perhaps the film was real and wasn't edited, but the creature caught on camera was probably an actor in a gorilla costume or something. Among all the animals, the American black bear is a perfect candidate for the role of Bigfoot. This giant beast is covered with fur and can stand on its hind legs. But the most exciting thing is that scientists have identified a pattern between Bigfoot reports and the black bear population. It turned out that people saw Bigfoot in the places where many bears live. Now, a similar story happened to Yeti. A group of scientists studied DNA hair samples that, as people said, belonged to the Yeti. They discovered that all these samples belong to rare species of bears and even dogs. This study may disappoint the fans of the fantastic monster, but it pleased the scientists. They got the information that can give a more detailed idea of the bear's evolution. Still, I'm sure there will be more Bigfoot sightings yet again. Reports of the next fantastic monster appeared in 1987 in Puerto Rico. An unknown creature entered farms to feast on goats, chickens, and other animals. Many said they had seen an animal similar to a dog, a reptile, and a rodent with an elongated face, large fangs, and scales. Some claimed they had seen a monster with smooth skin, little to no hair, and an unpleasant smell. No, it wasn't me. People called it the chupacabra. Every night, it would attack livestock, and farmers couldn't catch it. At least that's what the newspapers said. It was partly true. The residents did see a scary creature in the barns, but was it something fantastic? One scientist from the University of Michigan could solve the mystery of the chupacabra. He said that the monster was probably an ordinary coyote. More precisely, several coyotes having scabies. In Puerto Rico, some ticks climb on animals and cause itching. Because of this itch, coyotes lose their hair. This explains why many people saw bald monsters. The darkness, the fear of the unknown, and people's imagination turn the frightened animal into a monster. With a worse case of ticks, coyotes began to emit an unpleasant smell. Their skin loses its fur and becomes thicker. As a result, the animal turns into a chupacabra. It loses strength, so it chooses easier prey for hunting, livestock. This thing appeared in the middle of the night in the dense forests of West Virginia. It's a tall person with huge wings and glowing red eyes. You probably know it as the Mothman. People first heard about it in November 1966. In the small town of Point Pleasant, two young people were walking in the woods and saw a terrible monster, a massive guy with red eyes and 10-foot wings. They ran out of the woods and immediately called the sheriff. After that, the police began to comb the forest. A local newspaper wrote an article about the mysterious monster. From that moment on, rumors about the Mothman started to spread throughout the state and the U.S. It became as popular as Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. People made a festival in Mothman's honor, and Hollywood created a horror film about it. But unlike most of the cryptids, Mothman has no photos or videos. Myths and legends keep this creature popular. By the way, the residents of Point Pleasant benefit as their town has become a place of attraction for Mothman lovers. People make good cash selling souvenirs with the image of the monster. Tourists spend money on hotels and excursions and contribute to economic growth. What's the point of destroying all the myths about Mothman if it's that profitable? Nevertheless, the legend appeared somehow, and a guy named Jonathan Gitter decided to discover its origin. He studied the first newspaper articles about the Mothman and read many books. Almost all of them were written by cryptozoology enthusiasts. All the documentaries and articles didn't contain anything scientific either. However, Jonathan learned an exciting story about Point Pleasant. At the beginning of the 20th century, factories for producing harmful substances worked here. When the plants closed, the leftover substances began to pollute the environment. Perhaps some part of the story about the Mothman is connected with people's idea of polluted nature. The context of the town's history gave birth to Mothman in people's heads. In addition, in 1967, there was a big disaster in the city. The Silver Bridge, the main entrance road to Point Pleasant, collapsed. The tragedy brought a lot of grief, and some residents believe that Mothman was involved somehow. Our next cryptid lives in the water. A monster called Steller's sea ape is less famous than other pseudo-real creatures, but its appearance is quite specific. So imagine an oblong, thick body about 6 feet long, just under the height of an NBA star. The monster is covered with thick reddish-colored hair with a white stripe on its back. The head of Steller's sea ape looks like a dog's. Pointed ears look up, and long whiskers hang from both sides of the lips. Stories about it appeared thanks to naturalist George Wilhelm Steller. According to his description, the ape resembled a walrus or seal, but pictures on the internet show something between a mermaid and a cat. A naturalist saw this creature during the Great Northern Expedition aboard the ship St. Peter in the 1740s. On this maritime expedition, he met many animals, including the sea ape, and described them in his diary. He was a well-known naturalist, so many believed in the existence of this creature. Some believe that the naturalist described ocean seals. Others think that the sea ape was the captain of the St. Peter, Vitus Bering. Stiller had a conflict with the captain, so he could jokingly describe him as the sea ape. According to some records, Vitus Bering had a long drooping mustache and a large belly. So, the most popular cryptid in the world has a chance to get out of the field of cryptozoology and get into real science. This is the Loch Ness Monster. It makes no sense now to try and tell truth from fiction among thousands of records and messages about it. But hey, let's look at a recent scientific study. According to rumors and guesses, Nessie is a descendant of an ancient marine dinosaur, a plesiosaur. But this theory was quickly refuted because plesiosaurs lived only in saltwater. However, a group of paleontologists discovered fossils of this reptile in a 100-million-year-old river system. And this system was freshwater. That means that plesiosaurs could have lived in the giant lake Loch Ness. Perhaps one of their descendants has been able to survive to this day. So, go ahead, dip your toe in the water.
Just one day without sleep reduces your reaction speed, weakens your analytical skills, and causes stress. After 3 days without sleep, a person can feel irritable and their cognitive abilities decrease. A week without sleep can result in serious problems with your entire body. You no longer feel the difference between reality and imagination and have absolutely no idea what's happening around you. But in January of 1964, a young guy managed to stay awake for more than 11 days, and at the end of this period, he felt quite normal. This is the longest a person went without sleep. This event was even included in the Guinness Book of Records. It also allowed scientists to learn a lot about the structure of the human brain. It started at the end of December of 1963. 2 school students, 17-year-old Randy Gardner and his friend, started to think about an idea for a school science project. The friends quickly decided they would experiment with sleep. The goal was to stay awake for as long as possible and break the previous record. It was set by a DJ who managed to work for 260 hours straight. This is almost a full 11 days. Loud music and constant movement kept the DJ awake. But for Randy, it would be difficult to keep himself busy, especially at night. Initially, the topic of the project was the influence of insomnia on all kinds of people's abilities. But the guys quickly realized they didn't have the right equipment for a full-fledged study. That's why they decided to find out how sleep deprivation affects cognitive abilities, as well as basketball skills. Randy was supposed to stay active, and his friend tried to do everything to keep him awake. In the beginning, everything went well. Randy's friend kept a diary to record the smallest changes in Randy's body. The first 2 days were quite simple for Randy. He was constantly on his feet and didn't go to bed. He felt pleasant excitement, had fun, and did sports. Throughout all that time, his friend made notes in the diary. But on the 3rd day, the friend found himself sleeping against the wall. He had dozed off while writing notes. Luckily, Randy managed to stay awake. The guys quickly realized they couldn't cope with this without additional help. They called a 3rd friend and wrote an article for a San Diego newspaper. William Dement from Stanford University saw the article and got interested in this experiment. At that time, Dement was probably the only person in the world who studied the phenomenon of sleep. He immediately packed a suitcase and went to visit Randy. That's how 4 people got involved in the experiment. They tested Randy's sense of taste, hearing, and sense of smell. After 3 days, his cognitive and sensory abilities began to decline. The following morning, Randy felt nauseous. He walked around the house and found some citrus fruit. The smell of tangerines and oranges helped him get rid of the unpleasant sensations. The friends only slept one at a time. They never let Randy get bored. If he closed his eyes for even a second, sleep would instantly engulf him. One day, they played basketball for hours on end, and the next day, they went bowling. Once night fell, things got worse. At night, no one knew what to do. It was boring and difficult to keep Randy awake. Surprisingly, even after a week without sleep, Randy showed excellent results in basketball. He played even better than his friends. Also, his speech seemed clear and logical. By this time, most American newspapers had been writing about the experiment. Randy had become a celebrity, and it helped him stay awake. Other scientists came to observe the experiment. With the help of math exercises, they tested Randy's intellectual abilities, and that's where he showed poor results. He was solving a math problem when he forgot what was happening and what he was doing. The researchers also scanned the guy's brain and recorded its activity. Eventually, the experiment was nearing the end. In a few hours, Randy was going to break the previous record. He hadn't slept for almost 11 days. The scientists decided to take Randy to a special hospital to see how his brain would behave during sleep. On January 8, 1964, at 2 a.m., the new record was set. Randy hadn't slept for 264 hours. Finally, he could go to bed. The researchers attached electrodes to his head to observe his brain activity. Randy fell into a deep sleep. Several hours passed. He woke up, went to the bathroom, then went back to bed. It lasted 8 hours, 10 hours. Randy woke up only at the beginning of the 15th hour of sleep and just went to school. Everyone was shocked. It seemed this tricky experiment had no negative consequences. Randy continued to study as before, played basketball, and spent time with his friends. Meanwhile, scientists were studying the results of their research. It turned out that throughout all this time, Randy's brain kept napping. This meant that different parts of his brain slept one by one. When the guy played basketball, his analytical abilities were off. When he was solving math problems, the part of the brain responsible for reactions got turned off. In other words, one part of the brain had a little rest, and then it woke up, and another part of the brain had a nap. Randy wasn't the first person who didn't sleep for more than one night. Previously, the human brain had already experienced a lack of sleep and learned to rest in parts, distributing its resources evenly. But not all people are capable of this. Most likely, Randy was genetically predisposed to stay awake for so long. Several people tried to break the record, but no one managed to do it. During such experiments, lots of people got serious health problems. They brought themselves to the state where they saw hallucinations, forgot what had happened to them just a couple minutes before, couldn't think, and even behaved extremely unfriendly. And no wonder. Lack of sleep causes anxiety and bad stress. Without sleep, your body just can't function properly. This can lead to problems if you go outside. But even at home, you can forget about the stove or an iron you haven't turned off. You risk falling asleep at the most inopportune moment. You might see a unicorn and run after it without thinking about the consequences. You may lose your feeling of hunger, or, on the contrary, start eating a lot. And all of this could lead to stomach problems. No one should conduct such experiments. That's why the Guinness Book of Records stopped registering attempts to break Randy's record, so that people could no longer harm themselves. But let's return to our story. A long time passed. Everyone forgot about the record. And then, one day, Randy gave an interview. In it, he admitted he had experienced insomnia for a long time after the experiment. For years, he'd been struggling with this problem. Then he managed to set up a normal sleep schedule. Randy could fall asleep, but he rested for no more than 6 hours a day. Nature gave the human body the ability to survive in extreme situations. For example, if you don't eat for a long time, your body activates its survival mode. It takes food from your fat cells or muscle tissues. This way, it launches the process of using all currently available resources. A person can live without food for several weeks and without water for several days. As soon as a person gets food and water, their body recovers. The same goes for endurance. For thousands of years, people ran to survive. Our heart has learned to withstand enormous loads. But people have never had to face a lack of sleep in the entire history of evolution. This is why your brain is not adapted to long periods of wakefulness. Afterward, it may not recover because it doesn't know how to do it. but the brain's evolution may begin right now. People have never experienced such a lack of sleep as they do today. Social networks, parties, TV shows, exhausting office work, frequent flights, all this puts more pressure on the brain than ever before. In the past, a person could hunt a mammoth, return to the cave, and immediately go to bed. Now, after a tough working day, many people surf the internet and tire themselves even more. That's why it's so important to set up a good sleep schedule.
There are very snowy winters in Sweden, you know. Snow covers all roads and slows down the traffic. Some cars may pull over to the side of the road and get out only with the help of a tractor. This is a common thing. But one day, during a snowfall, something astonishing happened. On December 19, 2011, a man named Peter Skylberg found himself in a snow trap after he drove off the main road in the north of Sweden. Then snowmobilers accidentally found him, pulled him out of there, and took him to the hospital. It may seem like something common, but here's the kicker. It took 2 months to find him, and outside of that time, the temperature dropped to minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. That man survived after spending 60 days without water, food, and heat sources among icy winds and endless snow. The people who found him said the car was buried deep in snow at 3 feet. And Peter Skylberg was sitting shaking inside a sleeping bag in the front seat. He couldn't speak. When they brought him to the hospital, the doctors were amazed. They knew cases when people survived in cold temperatures for a long time, but not for 2 months. A person can live without water for several days, but Peter had no problems with this since he extracted water from the snow. Without food, a person can survive for several weeks to 3 months. But what about the cold? How did Peter solve this problem? At such low temperatures, people can freeze within several hours. The doctors treating Peter claimed that his body seemed to activate survival mode and fell into a deep sleep. It's like bears that hibernate during winter. But the human body can only lower the temperature by a few degrees. This is not enough to survive in minus 22 degree frost. Maybe the man somehow managed to lower the temperature even more. The case of Peter Skylberg became famous. Doctors and scientists from all over the world put forward their hypotheses about how this man managed to survive. No one could give the exact reason. Many people claimed it was just a real miracle. Others believed it was the result of several factors combined together. One of these factors is the sleeping bag. It helps keep your body heat better so your temperature may not drop for a long time inside the bag. Another factor that probably played the key role was the igloo effect. Indigenous peoples living at the North Pole make their homes out of ice and snow. You've probably seen these round houses on the internet or in the movies. It's not warm inside them, but it doesn't let the cold in. The particular design of these houses helps keep the accumulated heat inside. Igloos can protect from strong winds, but it's possible to survive inside them only if you're wearing warm clothes. Perhaps Peter's car turned into such a house. Snow clung to it from all sides and blocked the heat inside. Many people wondered why he hadn't tried to get out and find help. But seems like Peter did the right thing. It's pretty dangerous to go out in such conditions. You don't know where you are, it's freezing cold, and there's a blizzard. Let's say you get out of the car and try to get to the nearest road. You fail and come back. But you can't find your car because the snow has covered it. Now your situation is even worse. The only option is to start digging snow and make an igloo. If you have warm clothes, an igloo will help you to keep warm and gain some time. But the right solution is to stay inside the car and wait for the rescuers, especially if you don't know where you are. If you don't have communication or signal lights, then try to make a fire. Smoke can attract the attention of people passing on the nearest road. Peter Skylberg spent some time in the hospital, regained strength, and was cured. Now, it's much safer to be in a closed cold room or an igloo during the cold. However, if you're stuck in a severe frost without warm clothes, you have about 30 minutes to 2 hours, maybe even less if you don't move. But in 1980, a miracle happened that shocked people and doctors all over the U.S. 19-year-old Jean Hilliard was driving home at night to the small town of Lengby. She lost control and ended up in a ditch. The girl decided to walk to her friend. She then saw her friend's house, but she didn't get there. She got too weak and fainted. Suddenly, Jean fell and lost consciousness near her friend's house. Jean Hilliard was wearing a light winter coat, cowboy boots, and pants, so she wasn't quite prepared for harsh winter conditions. There was a strong blizzard and snowfall outside, so no one noticed her. The friend Jean wanted to visit only saw the frozen girl near his porch in the morning. Jean Hilliard had been lying there for 6 hours. Her body was hard and cold, as if it were made of rubber. Her eyes looked as if they were made of glass. The man who noticed the girl was sure she wasn't alive. But then, he saw bubbles of moisture from her nose. The girl was breathing. He got the girl to the hospital. Her body wouldn't bend, so putting the girl in the car was problematic. The doctors immediately rushed to help Jean, but that wasn't easy. They couldn't even make any injections, as the needles would constantly break. The muscles were too stiff and frozen. Her body activated emergency mode and stopped supplying muscles and soft tissues with blood. All the red liquid was directed at the vital organs. Also, in emergency mode, our organism can slow down all internal processes of the body. The heart starts pounding slower, the lungs consume less oxygen, and the metabolism nearly stops. Such energy savings helped the girl to survive. But the doctors were more surprised that Jean didn't get any serious troubles. She got frostbite, but the ice crystals didn't destroy her skin and soft tissues. Doctors decided to warm the girl with a bunch of heating pads. Then they finally managed to inject medications. A few hours later, she regained consciousness. The test showed that Jean was in perfect health. Meanwhile, you can get into a severe trap not only in nature and bad weather. You can get stuck in an elevator in a building full of people in Manhattan, and no one will know about it. This happened in 1999 with Nicholas White. The 34-year-old manager was working late in the office and decided to take a break. After getting some fresh air outside, Nicholas called the elevator to go back to the 43rd floor. But he got trapped in the elevator. It was already quite late, and almost all the workers had left the building. But the worst thing was that it was Friday night. Nicholas had no phone, no food, and no water. He pressed the emergency call button, but no one answered him. The cameras worked perfectly, but the guards didn't see him. The building was basically empty. Nicholas struggled with claustrophobia, walked from side to side, jumped, laid down, tried to open the doors, and waited for someone to rescue him. There were repair workers on the other floors, but they didn't hear Nicholas. Also, his colleagues stayed in the office where he worked. They were sure that Nicholas had just gone home. They left the office using other elevators and didn't notice that Nicholas had left his things on his desk. Well, Nicholas was in despair. He was rescued 41 hours later. He was lying on the elevator floor, tormented by thirst, when he suddenly heard a voice from the elevator speaker. "Hey, is anyone there?" Rescuers got the man out of the metal box, and the building owners paid him compensation for the inconvenience. Despite this nightmare, Nicholas continued to use the elevators. Yeah, living in Manhattan, it would be problematic to avoid them. Certainly for Nicholas, life has its ups and downs.
The night was dark and scary. A few hundred people were sitting in lifeboats, not knowing what would happen next or what their lives would look like from that moment on. All they knew was the giant ship they had been sailing on just a couple of hours earlier disappeared in front of their eyes. They were alone, waiting for help. Is anyone even coming? They had no idea if the rest of the ships that were traveling relatively close to them had heard their call for help. There was nothing else to do but wait. The Titanic, an iceberg, and one night, April 14th, 1912. It's one of the most famous stories from modern history that everyone talks about, even now, more than 100 years later. The 16 lifeboats on board could only accommodate a little more than 50%, 1,178 people, of the total number of passengers that were on board. And many of them were still half empty. In one of them, there was a little 2-month-old girl, Milvina Dean, the youngest passenger on board the giant ship. Her parents had decided to leave England because they wanted to build a better life in the United States. Her father had some family in Kansas, and he hoped they could start their own business there. The Dean family didn't actually choose to be on board this giant legendary liner, but because of a coal strike, they got transferred there, so they boarded it at Southampton as third-class passengers. Milvina's father felt when their ship hit the iceberg on that cold and seemingly peaceful night. He immediately went up to investigate. When he saw that people were panicking and that the crew members were giving warnings on the actual danger of the situation, he rushed to their cabin to find his wife. He told her to dress the children and quickly go up on deck. The crew members gave the order to get the lifeboats ready and start transferring women and children there first. It was a chance for at least some family members to get to safety. Milvina, her mother, and her brother got in Lifeboat 10. They were among the first off the liner out of the 706 crew members and passengers who managed to escape the sinking ship. Later, the liner called Carpathia heard their call for help, came for the passengers, and took them to New York. Her father, unfortunately, stayed behind them and didn't manage to save himself. Milvina grew up in Ashurst, England, which wasn't far from where she set sail on the ship. She spent her life working as a secretary and an assistant in small businesses in Southampton. She never married. Milvina always used to say she never spoke about the whole Titanic thing because she remembered nothing about it, so she didn't want people to think she was just drawing attention to herself. But in 1985, a French-American team got together and located the wreck of the Titanic. It was around 370 miles east of Mistaken Point, Newfoundland, in water that was more than 2 miles deep. That's when they confirmed the ship split in two. For decades, people believed the ship sank in one piece. They thought the only significant damage was the damage the hull got from its contact with the iceberg. In reality, it broke in half, right between its third and fourth funnels. It happened shortly before the ship disappeared under the surface of the water, and the whole thing, starting from the moment when they hit the iceberg, lasted around 2 hours and 40 minutes. People didn't pay that much attention to the Titanic until this team of researchers found the wreck. In the last year of her life, she sold some of her family's possessions at auction to pay for her stay in a nursing home. The items she sold also included a suitcase filled with clothes that her family got when they arrived in the US, and compensation letters her mom got from the Titanic Relief Fund. The compensation letters outlined the financial aid that certain passengers received who had survived the loss of their loved ones. She lived until the age of 97 when she caught pneumonia. She was the youngest of the 705 people that survived the whole event. The Titanic was the world's largest ship. Since it was so big, some thought the vessel should have had 4 exhaust stacks. But Thomas Andrews, the man who designed the ship, believed that only 3 were necessary. So, the Titanic basically had one purely decorative stack. 2,200 people were on board when the ship sank. There were 908 crew members, and the maximum number of passengers on board, which was 3,500. As you probably saw in the movie, there were different classes of passengers. The estimated overall wealth of those in first class was about $500 million, and researchers estimated $6 million worth of things went down to the ocean bottom, together with the ship. In first class, this liner was a place of luxury. It had 4 restaurants, 2 libraries, 2 barber shops, reading rooms, and a photographic darkroom on board. There was also a heated swimming pool, but only first-class passengers could use it, at a price of 1 shilling a time. The ship also had Turkish baths and electric baths, and passengers could use each for 4 shillings at a time. The cost to build this massive giant was $7.5 million, but that was back in 1912. Today, it would be about $200 million. First-class tickets cost $2,560 at the time, which is today's equivalent of $61,000. What would you get in these expensive cabins? A sitting room, 2 bedrooms, 2 wardrobe rooms, and a bathroom. Would you pay that much for those luxuries? Teams of researchers still haven't explored many areas on the Titanic. It's still very, very hard to access them with underwater vehicles. There was a lifeboat drill scheduled for the same day the Titanic sank, but it was called off for some reason. The crew had done just 1 lifeboat drill, and that was when the ship was still docked. But even if the crew members had been properly trained and each lifeboat had been filled, the capacity was still not enough to save each and every passenger. The Titanic was the biggest movable object in the world at that time. On May 31st, 1911, its immense hull made its way down the slipways and ended up in the River Logan in Belfast. Over 100,000 people were there to see the launch, which took just a little more than a minute and went off without a hitch. The people who were in charge of the ship immediately towed the hull to a mammoth fitting-out dock. Thousands of workers spent most of the next year there working hard, building the decks and constructing all those luxury interiors that gave the Titanic its specific look. They were also installing the 29 giant boilers that would power the ship's 2 main steam engines. All that to get the title Unsinkable. The ship had more than just one fatal flaw. You may have heard of one of its design flaws. The airtight bulkheads weren't completely sealed on top. This allowed water to flow from one compartment to another, which eventually sank the liner. And Titanic had more flaws. High sulfur content, cold temperatures, and high speeds largely affected the steel of the vessel's hull and the iron of its rivets. The steel here shattered, while the rivets popped out relatively easily. This was the reason the Titanic sunk 24 times faster than we'd expect. There are many theories about what really led to the sinking of such a giant. And one says a full moon from a couple of months before could be one of the reasons. It may have created very strong tides that sent a flotilla of icebergs southward. This was right in time for the Titanic's maiden voyage. Research says an optical illusion prevented the ship from getting help. One famous British historian, Tim Moulton, thought the atmosphere on the night of the sinking created specific conditions that made it very hard for the crew members to spot icebergs. They partially caused something called superrefraction. The extraordinary bending of light causes miraging, and several ships in the area recorded it. Not only did this prevent the crew from seeing the troublesome iceberg in time, but it also stopped one of the ships that could have offered help from identifying the call for help and communicating with the Titanic crew. Also, some say the ship was traveling too fast. From the start, they blamed the skipper for sailing such a big liner at such a high speed, 22 knots, through the cold and unpredictable waters of the North Atlantic, which was full of hidden icebergs.
Once every couple of months, you have bouts of hiccuping that last 10 to 20 minutes, and you think that it's horrible? Oh, my sweet summer child. Imagine hiccuping for 68 years straight. How would you like this? A man named Charles Osborne had quite a funny way of talking that he developed to hide the sound of his endless hiccups. Poor guy had been hiccuping non-stop starting from June 13th, 1922, for over 68 years. So here's the story. Osborne was born back in 1893, and he started hiccuping after a small accident on a farm in Nebraska. He fell over, but he didn't feel anything weird until he started hiccuping like crazy. Doctors think that the accident might have damaged a small part of his brain that helps stop the hiccup reflex. There are a few different theories about what might have caused his hiccups. Some people think that he might have hurt his ribs during the fall, and that messed with his diaphragm muscle. Others think that he hit his head and had a stroke. Either way, he was stuck with the hiccups for all his remaining life. Can you imagine having 20 to 40 involuntary diaphragm spasms per minute for that long? By the time Osborne finally stopped hiccuping, he had probably done it about 430 million times in total during all his 97-year-long life. It was so bad that he saw a number of doctors, sometimes traveling quite far, but nobody could fix it. One doctor even tried to help him by putting him on a mix of carbon monoxide and oxygen, and it helped for a bit, but that ended up being a bad idea, since breathing in the poison gas wasn't a safe solution. Instead, Osborne had to learn a special breathing technique to minimize the hic sound that came with each spasm. He'd breathe in between hiccups and flex his chest a few times per minute to suppress the noise. It was still obvious that he was hiccuping since he'd heave and jerk, but at least it wasn't as loud. Osborne had been hiccuping for 56 years when he became famous by giving an interview in 1978. He said that he'd do anything to get rid of the hiccups, and that he didn't even know what it would be like to not have them. He was constantly sore from all the jerking and spasming. After speaking up, he got a lot of attention in the media. He was even listed in the Guinness World Records and appeared on TV shows like The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, and that's incredible. People from all over the country sent him letters with suggestions for how to cure the hiccups, but none of them worked for more than a little while. But this ordeal didn't stop Charles Osborne from living a relatively normal life. People knew him as a happy-go-lucky guy who loved cracking jokes and didn't talk much about his condition. He married twice and had 8 children. He sold farm machinery and auctioned off livestock for living. In 1990, for reasons that are still a mystery, Osborne's hiccups suddenly stopped after over 6 decades. Unfortunately, he passed away just a year later. I bet, however, that his last months were really happy because they were finally hiccup-free. Despite all the medical advancements made since Osborne's time, there is still no surefire way to cure prolonged hiccuping. Hiccups are a strange phenomenon that have been around since the dawn of mammalian existence. We still don't fully understand why they happen or what purpose they serve. Researchers are slowly uncovering the answers to 2 key questions. Why do hiccups occur in the first place? And how can we stop them? Hiccups are a reflex action, similar to the way your leg jerks when a doctor taps your knee with a hammer. This reflex is found in many mammals, from household pets like dogs and cats to larger animals like horses and rabbits. When you hiccup, a nerve signal travels from your diaphragm, which is the muscle located at the bottom of your lungs, to your brain and back again. This process is repeated multiple times, causing your diaphragm to contract and your lungs to expand. However, in the middle of the inhale, a reflex causes your epiglottis, which is a flap of tissue that sits at the top of your throat, to suddenly snap shut, creating the characteristic hic sound. This is how the sudden closure of vocal cords sounds. This cycle continues until the reflex is interrupted by something like holding your breath or drinking water. Hiccuping is caused by the phrenic nerve, which is a long and oddly shaped cord that goes from the chest to the diaphragm. It first appeared in mammals' ancestors that were fish-like, but theirs was shorter and connected straight to the gills next to the brain instead of going all the way to the diaphragm. The reflex of hiccups might have been useful for amphibians that lived on land, as they needed to switch between breathing underwater with gills and breathing in the air with lungs. The epiglottis flap closed and thus sent water into their mouth and gills, keeping it from going to lungs. However, since humans no longer live underwater and do not have gills, why do hiccups still exist in us? They may have other benefits. For example, babies tend to hiccup more often than adults, especially while suckling milk. As they drink, they also swallow air, and the hiccups might be the body's way of clearing the air from the stomach. This reflex might work like a self-initiated burp. Interestingly, it's not just young infants who hiccup a lot. Even fetuses as young as 10 weeks old have been observed hiccuping. This process might serve to train fetuses' brains to map out their internal body. In other words, they need to learn where their diaphragm is located and how to control their breathing, and hiccups might help them practice breathing so they're ready when they're born. Approximately 4,000 people seek medical attention for hiccups each year in the United States. How to get rid of hiccups is one of the most commonly searched health questions on Google. Most hiccups resolve by themselves within 2 days, but longer-lasting bouts could indicate an underlying problem such as a brain tumor. Sometimes patients face continuous hiccups that don't go away even after medical treatment, known as intractable hiccups. In such cases, only treatment of the underlying condition helps. To address hiccups, doctors have tried different medications that aim to relax muscles and nerves that may cause diaphragm spasms, but there isn't enough clear evidence to recommend a specific treatment. There's a Japanese research group that has discovered a new method of curing hiccups, and it involves breathing in high-concentration CO2. It tricks the brain into thinking there's a life-threatening emergency, causing it to forget about the hiccups. However, if you can't travel to Japan for this treatment, you can try some old wives' tales that have been proven to work, like drinking a whole glass of water in one gulp, standing on your head, or getting really scared. These methods work by interrupting the reflex arc, so the nerves and muscles are distracted by something else. This is a conclusion made by Ali Sifi, a neurointensivist who became obsessed with finding a cure after seeing a patient wake up with unexplainable hiccups after brain surgery. Drinking water quickly, for instance, forces the diaphragm to keep creating suction, which keeps the phrenic nerve occupied. It interrupts one part of the reflex. Similarly, getting scared, for example, activates the vagus nerve, which has a calming effect, thereby interrupting the other part of the reflex. Ali Saif has created a tool called the Hickaway, which is more consistent than the traditional methods because it helps to combine both effects. It looks like a straw that requires the drinker to suck very hard, like drinking a thick milkshake, engaging both nerves and effectively ending the hiccups.
There are lots of famous mysteries that you can explain now, if you carefully study the details. The tragedy of the Titanic, for example. Anyone can recreate a picture of that night and build a map of those terrible events with all the information available online now. You can also explain what's going on in the Bermuda Triangle. Spoiler alert, nothing mysterious about it. Missing trains, time-traveling planes, strange black holes in the desert, spooky sounds, visual anomalies. You may not find the answers to all these riddles right away, but if you apply some critical thinking and a whole lot of dedication, you can eventually gain a better, more practical understanding of what exactly is going on. So, I'm now going to tell you about the disappearance of Martha Wright. But this story is not like all the others I just mentioned. This mysterious and creepy puzzle is almost impossible to solve. There are no leads, no clues, no theories that make any sense of it. This is one of those cases that can really make you feel clueless, pun intended. But regardless, I'll still try my best to explain it to you. So, let's look at the story from the very beginning and try not to miss even the tiniest details. The year is 1975. Jackson Wright and his wife Martha Wright are going by car from New Jersey to New York. It's a little hot inside the cabin, so Jackson turns on his AC. The road they're on leads them into the Lincoln Tunnel. They're driving in there, slowing down a bit. After a few minutes, Jackson starts to wipe the windshield, holding his hand on the wheel. Some condensation has accumulated on the glass because of the unstable conditioner. The rear window is also slightly fogged up, so Jackson slows down and then stops the car. There are no other vehicles in the tunnel. Jackson takes 2 rags out of the glove compartment. He gives one of them to Martha and asks her to wipe the rear window. His wife is moving into the backseat to remove the condensation. She doesn't leave the car. Jackson wipes the front window for a few seconds, turns to Martha, and can't find her. She's vanished. All the doors are closed. There is only one car in the tunnel, Jackson's. At first, he thinks it's some kind of a joke. He looks carefully at the back seats and out the windows. "Martha, where are you?" he asks in fear in his voice. He opens the door with his hands trembling. "Martha!" Jackson screams. His voice echoes through the entire dark tunnel. Martha Wright has just literally vanished into thin air. It's a bit creepy, isn't it? Poor Martha. And poor Jackson. At first glance, some might say that the real reason for Martha's disappearance is her husband, and that he made the whole story up as an excuse. We don't know what kind of relationship they were in. Maybe they had a fight or planned a divorce. Yes, it would be easy to blame the husband, but you don't have enough evidence to support that conclusion. Immediately after the disappearance, Jackson contacted the police. An investigation began. Detectives interviewed people passing by the tunnel that day. They carefully studied all the streets, alleys, and even the nearest basements. Of course, they didn't ignore the possibility that Jackson was guilty, but they couldn't find any evidence to that effect either. It almost seemed like Martha didn't exist at all. Jackson loved his wife. He couldn't get over the fact that no one could explain her disappearance. The police certainly couldn't find her. Jackson drove through that tunnel many times, hoping that one day, in the light of his headlights, the silhouette of his missing wife would appear. Are you getting nervous? Well, you need to beat that fear if you want to figure things out. You need to assess the situation with a clear mind. Okay, so it was 1975. There were no phones or cameras. There was one car in a dark tunnel. I'm sure there are some rooms and long corridors that connect the Lincoln Tunnel to the sewer system or the subway. So I'm thinking, what if someone took Martha Wright out of her car? What if it was mole people? You've probably heard of them, people that live in the underground labyrinths of the New York subway. There are a lot of rumors about them. The story goes that for some reason, they refused to live like ordinary citizens of the city and descended into its dungeons. They have no contact with sunlight at all. They can see in the dark. Their diet consists of rats and trash. They can quickly crawl on all fours and even climb walls. Their sense of smell is developed, and they can sense an uninvited guest from afar. Sometimes they get out of their tunnels at night to gather provisions or food. What if, on that terrible day in 1975, the mole people crept up to the car unnoticed, quietly opened the door, grabbed Martha, and dragged her into the kingdom of darkness? Jackson might not have noticed it. Sounds compelling, right? Well, fortunately, all these stories about mole people are fictional. There are people who live in the underground tunnel systems of major cities, but they don't look like moles, and they eat normal food. In other words, they're just people trying to survive. There are many articles on the internet describing their real life. They come down to live in the tunnels for various reasons. The most common story is that for one reason or another, they couldn't make it in the city. For example, one guy lost his job and had a fight with his wife and got injured, so everyone abandoned him, and his only option was to migrate down below. There was one story of one woman who tried to hide from some bad people on those underground labyrinths. Hundreds and even thousands of people live in environments like these, each for their own reasons. And believe me, their way of life is not as terrible as it may seem. Many people in these tunnels have electrical appliances, internet access, water, and heating. Inside many of these communities, it is forbidden to steal, harm anybody, or behave rudely or obscenely. People here try to help each other. During the day, they can earn money by washing cars, or handing out bottles, or at the laundry. At night, they return back to the tunnels. Lots of these people just couldn't integrate into society. Some people are happier there because they don't have to pay taxes and rent. They don't have to follow the rules and pretend to be someone they aren't. Many of them are polite, smart, and well-educated. Often they are friends with many street artists and filmmakers. It's a unique lifestyle, all on its own, with its own communities. Occasionally, some of them would manage to get out of those tunnels, but then return, feeling that they really belonged to the tunnel system and couldn't quite integrate with the world up above. It was in 1904, when the first line of the New York subway opened, that stories about these mole people began to spread. Since then, these stories have been overrun with legends and myths. The city's residents thought that the tunnel's inhabitants had created secret societies with their own system of rules and laws, infrastructure, and the division between poor and rich. Few people ventured down there to check. But in the late 90s, more and more journalists began to conduct investigations about these mole people. Eventually, the myth was debunked. But who knows? Maybe in the 1970s, there were many dangerous people among the tunnel inhabitants. Honestly, I can't believe that they managed to pull Martha out of the car and into the tunnels without Jackson noticing. For one thing, she would have screamed or tried to kick loose. Plus, all the car doors were closed. So, as far as theories go, this ain't it. Okay, then let's keep looking. We have the car, the AC, the tunnel, the sunny weather. All right, let's look at the tunnel again. It seems to me that something is wrong with it. Something in the story doesn't quite add up. If we look at the maps and traffic data, we will see that many drivers use the Lincoln Tunnel daily. I'm sure it was just as popular in the 1970s. So how is it possible that Jackson and his wife were the only visitors to this tunnel in the middle of the day? They were driving in it for a few minutes, then stopped to wipe the windows. And not a single car passed by during that time. The tunnel wasn't closed or under repair. Jackson wouldn't have been able to get there if that were the truth. People walk through this tunnel in any weather. They hide here from the rain and heat and use the tunnels like a little shortcut. You can meet anyone there, at night, early in the morning, and in the afternoon. Why didn't Jackson see anyone? All right, we're getting nowhere with this. Let's look at the story from a different angle. Where were Jackson and Martha coming from? Where exactly were they going? To visit friends? Maybe their relatives? And who exactly were they? That's something we ought to know, right? And luckily for us, that's exactly where the most interesting part of the story actually is. As it turns out, there is no information about this married couple on the internet. You can check phone directories, databases, marriage registrations, and other sources, but you won't find Martha or Jackson Wright. You won't find their friends or relatives. That's strange, but what about the police? The case of the disappearance of Martha Wright is quite famous after all. Some big newspapers wrote about it. Perhaps someone's even covered it on TV. But if you search for it, you will soon find that the information about Martha Wright is basically the same on all websites. It's a small column without any additional information. If you search on Google Books, you'll find one result: a book describing mystical tales with no evidence. Reading it, it really just feels like someone just took all of the world's most famous urban legends and put them together on one page. Well, there you go. Looks like we found our answer. Martha Wright didn't disappear because she never really existed. But don't give the credit to me. I'm not the genius who solved this. To find the answer, I visited the greatest detective community in the world, Reddit users. They solved the mystery of Martha's disappearance long ago and shared it with everyone. Okay, here's a rhetorical question. Why did reputable newspapers publish an article about Martha Wright? And this wouldn't be the only time either. This story is similar to another famous case about a young guy who was walking through a field near his farm and just vanished into thin air. His family and friends saw it with their own eyes. This story appeared in several films and TV shows about mystical phenomena without any evidence or details. What's the point of making it up? Well, to sell copies. People like these kinds of riddles. People can be strangely captivated by the prospect of the unknown. One of the most popular fake mysteries was about the Pan Am Flight 914. This plane took off in 1955 from New York and then disappeared from all radars. It was supposed to arrive in Florida a few hours later, but it landed at the airport in Venezuela 37 years later. Another case, 1954. Santiago Airlines Flight 513 took off from an airport in West Germany. The plane was due to land in Brazil in 18 hours. There were 88 passengers and 4 crew members on board. The plane disappeared from the sky and from the radar. Air traffic controllers tried contacting the pilots but didn't receive any response. 18 hours later, they called the airport in Brazil. Those dispatchers couldn't confirm the plane's landing. They couldn't contact it either. The plane did eventually land on October 12, 1989. It was in perfect condition, but none of the passengers had survived. These stories seem unrelated to each other, but they do have 2 things in common. First, you won't find a list of passengers or employees. You'll also find that those dispatchers from the 50s and 80s didn't exist either. Second, you'll find that both of these stories were actually published in the same newspaper, one known for its tall tales and fake news. Once again, there is nothing mystical about these cases. But we have gotten to the truth. And now we know a lot more about how to evaluate information critically. The next time you hear about some girl seeing a flying monster near a rock festival or some guy disappearing from his pool, don't just believe it right away. Try to study the details. Check the sources. As a rule, these kinds of fantastical stories fall apart if you look at them just a little more closely. The real world is complicated and mysterious, but it is by no means impossible to understand. You just need to think critically and pay attention to the details.
We're in England, in the village of Turville. It's 1871. Here, on one street, you can find a particular house. It's no different from the others, but many stay around it and wait for something. The house's doors open. Several adults come out of there. They look surprised and say that all the rumors turned out to be true. The woman goes out on the porch and asks a few more people to come in, and you're among them. You go inside, head into the room, and see an 11-year-old girl sleeping on the bed. She looks pale and thin. Despite loud people's conversations in the room, the girl doesn't wake up. Her mother says it's been 6 months since she fell asleep. You leave the room, and the next few people come in to see the sleeping girl with their own eyes. This is a story about the most prolonged sleep in history. The record belongs to a girl named Ellen Sadler, who slept for 9 years. She was born in the English village of Turville in the second half of the 19th century in a big family. Ellen was the 12th kid. Her parents weren't wealthy and worked hard to make ends meet. They taught their sons and daughters to help them from an early age, and Ellen was no exception. When she turned 11, she left home to work as a nanny in a nearby town. While away from her family and surrounded by strangers, Ellen began to feel bad. She had a headache, felt discomfort, and felt certain drowsiness. These symptoms became so severe that the girl couldn't work properly. She returned to the house in the village, where her parents sent her to the hospital. The doctors didn't know how to help her because they couldn't diagnose her. They spent 18 weeks trying to cure the poor girl. As a result, still unwell, Ellen was discharged from the hospital. After returning home, she experienced severe headaches and drowsiness. Ellen Sadler felt worse and worse. And then, one day, she quietly lay down in her bed and fell asleep. Ellen woke up only after 9 years. All this time, the girl's mother took care of her. She fed her milk and tea. The sleeping girl was losing weight and strength. Soon, the whole village found out about Ellen. People started coming to her house to see an unusual phenomenon. They looked at her, tried to wake her up, and told their friends about her. The news about the sleeping girl spread throughout the country. Ellen had become a spectacle. People from all over England came to see a person who had been sleeping for several years. They called the house where Ellen's family lived Sleepy Cottage. Doctors and reporters came there. One journalist from the Daily Telegraph described that the girl's body was weak and too soft. Her feet were icy cold, and her lips were blue. The child's breathing was barely discernible. It seemed that life was slowly leaving this body. The girl's family took donations for the care of their daughter. Therefore, many people thought it was all a performance. For some reason, the mother didn't allow the doctor to stay with Ellen for a long time. Some said that her mother gave her sleeping pills every day to not let her wake up. And someone claimed that they had seen a conscious girl sitting by the window. Also, the girl's mother rejected the doctor's offer to conduct a medical examination in a London hospital. We're unlikely to find out the whole truth about her since there was no official diagnosis from doctors. It's possible the girl fell into a coma or suffered from another disease that was unknown to science in the 19th century. It could be a chronic sleep disorder in which a person experiences uncontrollable bouts of drowsiness. You can walk down the street and want to sleep so much that you fall to the ground. Ellen grew up in a large family and got used to hard work early. Perhaps severe fatigue and lack of sleep provoked narcolepsy. In any case, this story had a good ending. One day, Ellen Sadler woke up. She didn't remember what had happened and was very surprised when her family told her about the 9-year-long dream. The girl's growth slowed down a little and her eyesight worsened, but her health wasn't bad. Ellen got married and had 6 children. In 1911, at the age of about 50, she passed away. Let's see a completely opposite story about a person who set a record for the longest time without sleep. In January 1964, 17-year-old Randy Gardner, a high school student, claimed he stayed awake for several weeks. The experiment started in December and ended in January. At the end of that time, he felt pretty normal. This event was in the Guinness Book of Records and allowed scientists to learn a lot about the structure of the human brain. Randy wanted to do a science school project related to sleep. He had to stay awake as long as possible, and his friend had to make sure that he was always awake. In the beginning, everything went well. Randy's friend kept a diary where he recorded the slightest changes in the subject's body. Randy held on easily for the first 2 days. He was constantly on his feet and didn't come to bed. After 3 days, his cognitive and sensory abilities began to decline. On the 4th day, Randy felt sick. He walked around the house and sniffed citrus fruits. The smell of lemons and oranges helped him get rid of this bad condition. During the day, Randy played basketball and went bowling with friends. The nights were boring because the guys didn't know what to do. But still, Randy didn't go to bed. A week passed and Randy showed excellent basketball results. His physical skills hadn't changed. His speech was clear and logical. By this moment, the news all over the country had been speaking about Randy and his experiment. He became a celebrity, and it also helped him stay awake. Scientists came to Randy. With the help of mathematical questions, they tested his intellectual abilities, and here he showed poor results. He was solving an example in mathematics, but then he forgot what was going on and what he was doing. Scientists scanned his brain and recorded its activity data. Then, on January 8, 1964 at 2 a.m., Randy broke the previous record time without sleep. He was awake for 264 hours. Scientists attached electrodes to his head when he fell asleep and observed brain activity. Randy woke up after a few hours of sleep to go to the toilet. Then, he lay in bed and got up only after 14 hours. He went to school in a great mood. Everyone was shocked. It seemed that his brain-heavy experiment had no negative consequences. Randy continued to study as before, play basketball, and spend time with friends. Scientists studied brain research results and found that Randy's brain was catching a light sleep all this time. These are called microsleeps, and the curious thing is that the person who's experiencing it may not even notice that they're technically sleeping. Several years passed. Everyone already forgot about this record. Randy grew up. One day, a reporter remembered Randy's experiment and interviewed him. He admitted that the experiment hadn't passed without a trace. For many years, Randy experienced severe insomnia. It was driving him crazy. He spent a lot of time and effort to overcome this disease. Fortunately, he managed to adjust his sleep regime. Randy slept 6 hours a day, which was quite enough. Repeating this experiment is a bad idea. Even 2 days without sleep are a great stress for the body. For thousands of years, people have survived hunger and complex work conditions. Our heart is trained to experience high loads, and our body can survive difficult situations. But our body has never encountered a lack of sleep in the entire history of humanity. Evolution has not taught us to endure sleepless nights without consequences, which is why it's bad for our health.
You wake up in your house and take out an umbrella. It's Saturday, and it's cleaning time. You reach for the magical button, and the dishes, furniture, walls, floors, and even your clothes in the closet get sparkling clean. You have the rest of the day to yourself, and so you lie on the dust-free couch with your favorite book. This sci-fi setting was everyday reality for Frances Gabe for decades. She didn't clean her house at all. She didn't hire anyone to do it. Yet, it remained perfectly clean. Frances was born in 1915 in Idaho. Her father, Frederick, was an architect and building contractor. The family had to move a lot for his job, and Frances attended 18 elementary schools. She said she was born a most unusual person, and everything moved much too slowly for her at school. The girl preferred the company of her dad and his coworkers. She watched them and learned their craft. Frances graduated from Girls Polytechnic High School in Portland at 16. Next year, she got married. By the late 1970s, she was divorced and a single mother of 2 kids. She always thought of housework as a thankless, unending job. One day, she noticed fig jam slithering down her wall. Frances got so mad, she decided to put an end to all of this for good. She brought out the garden hose, got rid of the jam, and started designing her own self-cleaning house. She spent more than a decade and thousands of dollars of her own savings transitioning her Oregon home into a giant floor-to-ceiling dishwasher. By 1984, it was all finished. Frances received an official U.S. patent for her self-cleaning building construction. It consisted of 68 separate devices that made all the cleaning fully automated. Every room had sprinklers in the ceiling. Frances would put on her raincoat, take out an umbrella, and press a button to activate the sprinklers. They'd spray soap and water in a circular motion. Then it was all rinsed. Warm air then went through the vents to dry it all. In less than an hour, the walls, floors, bathrooms, toilet, and bath were all crisp, clean, and dry. The floors were coated with many layers of marine varnish and ever so slightly tilted toward the walls. There were gutters at the edge of every room. Water from the sprinklers didn't go to waste. It drained out of the house into the doghouse to wash the dog along the way. Furniture that wasn't supposed to get rinsed was covered in clear acrylic cases made of resin. Books had waterproof jackets. Papers were sealed in a plastic box, and pictures on the walls, including the patent, had glass cases to keep them safe. Awnings covered the beds to keep linen dry. Frances also invented her own waterproof fabric for the upholstery. The cupboard would make dishes clean without any assistance needed. Clothes would be placed inside a cabinet on hangers, washed and dried, and then, still on hangers, pulled into the closet with chains. The electrical outlets were all safely covered, of course. There were no carpets or curtains, no dust collectors allowed. Sometimes, the pipes would burst and water would spray in all unwanted directions. But all in all, it was running smoothly for about 20 years. Frances was dreaming about more self-cleaning homes and even self-cleaning office buildings, hospitals, and villages around the world. Her idea was to help single moms and women fed up with cleaning, and also people who can't clean due to health issues. She was traveling the U.S. giving lectures on her invention and showing a model of her design. She was featured in newspapers and on TV, but the idea never took off. By 2002, she couldn't afford to run the house and renew her patents, so they expired. Frances gave tours of the house, so she had some money, but that wasn't enough. This and natural disasters like floods and earthquakes turned the once cleanest house into a cluttered construction. In 2009, the lady moved into a retirement home. The house was sold some years later to a new owner who now has to clean it himself. Many people mocked the idea, and the self-cleaning home revolution never happened. Still, architects and builders these days admit her idea was functional and worth bringing to life. In 1998, when computers were taking off and taking up all of your attention, someone came up with and patented a brilliant idea of a motivational candy dispenser. It would be equipped with an optical sensor attached to your screen. The sensor keeps an eye on all of your activities and rewards you with candy for sending a work email or finishing a long important paper. The more work tasks you perform, the more candy you get. A cyborg-like wrist pouch to carry pencils, phone, lip balm, and other little necessities on your wrist was patented in 2001. If you don't enjoy raking leaves in the fall, you'd probably love the unique solution described by its inventor as compatible with the natural body movement of a person. Leaf-gathering pants have zip-on flexible tubes attached to pant legs and a net fastened in between to gather leaves as you walk. You can easily remove the large piles you leave behind later. The greenhouse helmet was designed to bring nature to big city guys. You put on a self-enclosed anti-fog covered dome on your head with tiny plants on built-in shelves. When you exhale, the plants take care of all the bad elements and recharge you with the purest oxygen. The helmet would be equipped with an intercom system to let you communicate with people outside your dome. In case you have a pet, but don't have 24 hours in the day to give it all the non-stop physical attention it wants, the automatic pet petter is something you'd appreciate. It works for both cats and dogs with its mechanical hand and plays relaxing tunes to them. The gadget is activated when Spot or Jingles gets on a motion sensor platform. Pet ears can get in the wrong places, like a soup plate, and spread the food all over the place. Back in 1980, someone decided to take care of it and patented the lightweight, adjustable, and easy-to-use animal ear protectors. They were designed especially for pets, mostly dogs, with long ears to prevent any contact with food. They also suggested decorating the tubes on special occasions. An anti-eating face mask was invented around the same time for those who have to spend their days around food for professional reasons. Chefs, cooks, and other restaurant staff dealing with food can put it on and lock it with a little padlock. Breathing and talking are still possible, but it makes eating highly problematic. The most important thing is not to lose that key, or you'd have to go on an eternal diet. Sled pants were equipped with a seat to slide down hills, and leg and waist straps to keep them securely attached to the owner. They were configured to take the shape of the human body. To stop the sled once you reach your destination, you'd have to fold the lower part up and walk away, pretending you didn't just ride your own pants. The 1923 head exerciser was invented to give you better circulation. Two people would hold a metal plate between their teeth. The plates were held together by a spring. As the pair pulled each in their direction, they'd take part in a sort of tug-of-war for the head. Someone came up with a brilliant idea of a watch that would let you know how long you have left to live in years, months, and minutes. The life expectancy guess would be based on some statistical methods and personal health factors of the owner. The watch had a microprocessor for storing data and buttons and switches to reset that data. Pet display clothing would be the perfect choice for those who can't leave their master at home alone. It's a vest or a belt with many tubular passageways going all around the body of the owner. The whole construction is see-through. There are little chambers for feeding and to take the pet out. An automatic tip requester consisted of an artificial hand and a box for cash to wear on your wrist. When the money someone would drop down the connecting tube didn't seem enough, a no sale sign would pop up. Sea shoes invented in the 1960s made walking on water possible. They used duck foot propellers and required some good sense of balance from the owner to stay afloat.
Would you like to have a super memory? What if you could remember any piece of your life in great detail? For example, you're walking down the street with a friend and you hear a song. You remember hearing a fragment of this song 10 years ago on TV during the winter holidays in the Alps. You remember every celebration of your birthday, every party in your life. Sounds cool, but is it so good to remember your whole life? Let's find out by the example of a real person. Meet Rebecca Sherrick from Brisbane, Australia, who remembers her whole life. Literally, all of it. All events are stored in her mind almost from birth, and she has immediate access to them. She remembers her parents put her in the driver's seat of a car for a photo just a few days after her birth. She remembers how the seat cover and steering wheel aroused her curiosity. Rebecca remembers how she started having her first dreams at 18 months old. She didn't distinguish dreams from reality and thought that she was really leaving home somewhere. That's why she always wanted her mom to be with her. She also remembers by heart a big book she read many years ago. She can easily remember how she lay in bed, looked at the surrounding toys, and how her mother approached her to feed her when she couldn't even talk and walk. She sees it so clearly as if it happened yesterday. She remembers not only visual images, but also smells and even feelings and sensations that she experienced during some moments in the past. For a long time, Rebecca lived confident that everyone in the world had such a memory. Then, in adolescence, she began to suspect something was wrong with her. She noticed that she was fixated on some things from the past much more than her surroundings. It seemed to her that she had a mental disorder, and she felt insecure for this reason. but she had no idea how special she was. She learned about her uniqueness at age 21, when her parents showed her a news report about people with a phenomenal memory. Rebecca was surprised that it was something special. She realized she was among the 60 people worldwide with highly superior autobiographical memory, or HSM. This is a neurological condition of the brain in which a person can quickly and effortlessly reproduce in memory any fragment from life in the past. These may be some social events or personal experiences, and all of them spring up in your memory as clearly as if you're watching a high-quality video recording. Scientists are still studying the HSM phenomenon. It was discovered at the beginning of this century, and there are few objects to study, only about 60 people. The lack of information and observation slows the research process. But doctors have already learned something. This is part of the brain that helps process memory. A person with an ordinary mind remembers bright moments from life very well. In a sense, the brain of people with HSM records all the moments as bright ones. That's why people have such easy access to them. It was important for Rebecca to get an official medical diagnosis because she wanted a clear answer to the question of what was wrong with her and to improve her self-esteem. To confirm the diagnosis, Rebecca had to go through a multi-year study. She did various analyses and passed multiple tests. Then, a couple of years later, Rebecca returned and told the scientists about what had happened 2 years ago. When her case became famous, she revealed the dark sides of her gift, which she also calls a curse. So, HSM seems like a cool superpower. But there's a bad side here. Do you know that moment when you're lying in bed and suddenly remember something embarrassing that happened to you a few years ago? For example, you disgraced yourself during a presentation, or couldn't find the right phrase in an argument, or behaved very stupidly on a date. So people with HSM have constant access to all these awkward moments. You can remember every last detail of every wrong moment in life. And of course, such thoughts are pretty challenging to control. Imagine how difficult it will be to fall asleep if you start remembering and reliving bad moments in life. It would be hard not to go crazy after years of such a life, and the problem is not even in the most minor visual details, but in the repeated reproduction of feelings and emotions. Someone said something hurtful to you, or you saw scary pictures on TV many years ago. All this can pop up in your memory many years later if you have HSM and return the same emotions to you. If Rebecca remembers a stressful case when she was 3 years old, then as an adult, she will experience this case as a 3-year-old girl. Such emotional swings contribute to the appearance of depression, anxiety, and stress. And the more negative emotions you accumulate, the harder it will be for you to fall asleep at night. That's why Rebecca takes great care in life. She understands that any unpleasant thing can remain in her memory forever. She takes medications to control the incoming information and goes to a therapist who helps her avoid bad situations. Imagine that you need to think ahead about every step in your life. Should I watch this movie or not? Go home the other way? Read this dude's Twitter thread. This makes you too cautious and severely restricts your life because you know these moments will stay with you forever. Perhaps you would avoid risks so as not to fail. And such a life reduces the chances of success in every way. Yeah, it's cool to have HSM if you were born into a wealthy family, travel a lot, have no health, mental, or social issues. Everything works out for you, and you're always happy. But let's be honest, almost no one has such a life. And even the rich and successful have problems. Some people with HSM say that their memories are well organized in the brain, like books on a bookshelf in alphabetical order. But Rebecca's memory is chaotic. Her brain is filled with worries. This often causes her insomnia and headaches. Perhaps this is because she also has a confirmed diagnosis of autism. But Rebecca's life didn't turn into a nightmare. Fortunately, she learned how to overcome bad memories with positive ones. If some bad moment begins to invite into her mind, she covers it with a happy piece from her life. And this is the most beautiful part of HSM. This feature in the brain helps you solve exams, learn something quickly, and remember all books and movies. But the coolest thing is the opportunity to experience happiness anew. Even if you're in a bad mood, you remember how much fun you had that day at the water park, and your brain enjoys this moment. This allows you to experience happiness every day, every minute. At the beginning of each month, Rebecca selects the best moments of this month in the past years. When she returns to them, it helps to fight bad memories. Another cool feature Rebecca has learned is the ability to turn any nightmare into a happy and beautiful dream. She can build and create whatever she wants during sleep, and she can remember all her dreams. Not all people with HSAM have this ability, but some also reported they had lucid dreams they could control. By the way, the only memory Rebecca doesn't have is her birthday. She doesn't know how she felt inside her mother's belly and says she wouldn't want to remember it. Today, Rebecca lives an ordinary life. She doesn't want big changes and likes to think and feel how she's used to it. She hopes that her case will help many people worldwide, so she participates in 2 scientific studies that can help treat certain brain diseases.
Hello, Brightsiders! I recently decided to propose to my girlfriend and I went to the jewelry shop. While choosing a ring, the seller told me stories about different stones, and one of them about why members of the royal family would never buy rubies was the most fascinating. Rumor has it that British monarchs see rubies as bad luck. But where would they get an idea like that, and why did the superstition start in the first place? Nobody knows, but many people put it down to Queen Victoria. The story goes that the 19th century monarch didn't like this gorgeous red gemstone. As you know, Victoria, the great-great-grandmother of Elizabeth II, was very influential, especially regarding fashion trends. And anything the queen of trendsetting did like almost instantly became mandatory. As proof, let's remember that white satin wedding dresses only became all the rage after Queen Victoria's marriage to Prince Albert in 1840. Before that, brides wore all sorts of colors. The only color considered bad luck was, get ready for this, white. Before Victoria changed the game, white was associated with misfortune. In some cultures, like in India, it still is. Since the queen could so quickly turn what was once bad luck into a wedding custom that would live for ages, it's natural to think she did the same thing, only in reverse, with rubies. After all, Victoria didn't wear them at her wedding. She wore sapphires and diamonds. But where did her distaste for rubies come from? Just personal preference, or fear of an ancient curse? Let's look at the facts. Victoria's mother celebrated her daughter's wedding by giving her what's known as ruby parure. A parure is a set of jewels the royals wear together, like earrings and a necklace. As its name implies, it was brimming with rubies. Before handing it down, Victoria wore the coronet that was part of the set on many occasions. There is also a theory that her husband was the one with the ruby phobia and forbade the gemstones on their wedding day. But it turns out to be a myth because Victoria's engagement ring shaped like a serpent was made of tiny rubies, diamonds, and an emerald. So while Queen Victoria started plenty of traditions, the idea that rubies are bad luck isn't one of them. And have all the British royals avoided rubies? Because there has definitely been some bad luck associated with the red gemstone. The marriages that come after a ruby engagement don't seem to stand the test of time. Look at Princess Margaret, sister of Elizabeth II, and Sarah, Duchess of York, who'd been married to the Queen's son Andrew. Both had ruby engagement rings, and marriages didn't last. Maybe you've heard that as soon as Mary of Teck received a ruby engagement ring, the groom-to-be succumbed to influenza? Well, don't jump on the superstition train just yet. There's no evidence that Mary ever received a ring of any kind from the engagement. Her mother, Princess Mary Adelaide, Queen Victoria's cousin, didn't get a ruby ring. The marriage didn't end, but it was pretty much a case of Mary settling for a suitor because she had no other options. Not exactly an epic love story. Or do you think the gem was at fault? And what about all those other unhappy brides with rubies on their fingers? If we're looking for examples of unlucky marriages in the British monarchy, the first person that comes to mind is Henry VIII. Of Henry's 6 wives, 2 may have donned rubies. Anne of Cleves wore what looked like an emerald and a ruby ring in the portrait that convinced Henry to marry her. Unfortunately, the real Anne proved less appealing, so Henry ordered their marriage annulled the following year. On the bright side, if you know anything about what happened to Henry's other wives, then it seems like the ruby ring was a lucky one for Anne. Well, the second wife to wear the ring, Catherine of Havard, wasn't so lucky. I guess this disproves the theory altogether. But think about this. Many of the rocks on those engagement rings come from crowns. Unsurprisingly, the royal family has all sorts of bejeweled headpieces. Dainty coronets, small tiaras, and the one with the world's largest uncut ruby, the Black Princess ruby. You might not have heard the name, but I'm sure you've seen it. Picture the king or queen of England and the big crown on their head, the one that looks like a puffy fur hat. It's known as the imperial state crown, and it's probably the reason why you drew crowns the way you did when you were a kid. You know, with the giant blob of red in the middle. Well, the blob is a ruby. Yeah, it's that big, about 2 inches long and weighing 170 carats. That's almost the weight of a golf ball, which wouldn't sound impressive if we weren't talking about the gemstone here. The famous and historic ruby isn't precisely a ruby, it's a spinel, but I won't get too technical here. It was named after Edward of Woodstock back in the 14th century, and he went by the nickname the Black Prince because of the black armor and the shield he wore. Edward got the ruby from another king, Don Pedro the Cruel, in exchange for helping him to deal with some unrest in his territory. But before Edward got a hold of it, the giant gem had its own mysterious and troublesome past. Some people believe that the ruby was cursed by the Prince of Granada, from who Don Pedro had taken it. There's no evidence that Don Pedro cursed the ruby again before giving it to Edward, but it's hard to imagine a guy nicknamed the Cruel parting very peacefully with a jewel that big. But did the Black Prince's ruby bring good luck or bad luck to the royals? I guess it depends on who you ask. Henry V wore a gem-encrusted helmet that included the Black Prince's ruby when fighting in France in 1415. One day, he got whacked in the head really hard. What's worse, he nearly lost his fancy helmet. Bad luck. Then again, he survived, and he kept the helmet and the ruby, so good luck. Richard III was supposedly wearing the Black Prince's ruby when he was in Bosworth Field fighting it out with Henry Tudor towards the end of the same century in 1485. All I'll say is, Richard wasn't so lucky. Yes, that points to the ruby being bad, but that's only a rumor. Maybe he wasn't wearing it at all. While you're thinking about that, consider this. That ruby now resides smack in the middle of one of history's most recognizable crowns. And as I said, a lot of royal engagement rings feature jewels that previously adorned crowns. Imagine what would happen if a would-be princess told her love-struck prince that she'd love to have, a big shiny ruby. I don't know, maybe the biggest one out there, the Black Prince's ruby. If you heard of Romeo and Juliet, you know it's not easy to dissuade young love. And when it comes to royal families who tend to marry royalty from other countries, such a denial could even start some major conflicts. Wouldn't it be better to avoid the whole thing by concocting a myth? Then the king could tell his love-struck son, I know she likes rubies and I'd love to give it to her, but did I tell you about the curse? Oh, it's terrible. If you love her and want her to be safe and happy, you must make sure she never wears this ruby. Or maybe the trends just changed over time. Rubies were out, diamonds were in, and that switch could have been done on purpose. We now see diamonds as the go-to engagement rock, but it wasn't always that way. Before 1940, only about 10% of brides-to-be received diamond engagement rings. What changed? Well, experts point to an ad campaign by a jeweler named De Beers Diamonds that linked these rocks with love. And it worked. But the more superstitious members of the royal family will swear by the evidence. If rubies mean short-lived marriage, then diamonds are forever. Like the 15-year marriage of Camilla and Charles, Sophie and Edward going strong for 20 years. Queen Elizabeth herself had a diamond engagement ring, and she and Prince Philip have been married for over 70 years. Maybe it's because of history or just trends. I'll let you decide why the British royal family has sworn off rubies.
It's 2018. You get up early in the morning to go ashore and catch some fish. You come to the spot you were yesterday, throw the hook into the sea, and wait. The float is twitching. You've caught some fish, but hey, hello? Why aren't you doing anything? Right now, you don't care about the fish. You're looking at something in the distance. You open your mouth in surprise since you see a huge ship stuck on a shoal. It wasn't here yesterday, so it got here at night. Okay, it'll probably sail away sooner or later. You fish for a few more hours. During this time, you observe the ship and notice no movement there. Is it empty? Boats and the coastal service are sailing from the shore to the vessel. You decide to check it out too. You get in your old boat and go there. The mist descends to the water, making the ship look creepy. The colossal vessel is rusty and empty. But where is the whole crew? And how did it get there? The Coast Guard comes on board. They search the hold, the cabins, and the upper deck. There's someone's stuff, some remnants of food supplies, notebooks, and clothes. Everything suggests the crew has disappeared for some reason. Fishers who noticed the vessel first didn't see anyone coming down from the board. No radio signals were sent to the port, and no one reported about the ship. It appeared here from nowhere. The only chance to get any information is to look at the number and name of the vessel. This is Sam Ratulangi, PB 1600. The Coast Guard checks the information, studies the data of all the country ships, and no way. One company built the boat in 2001 in Indonesia. People used it to transport heavy loads across the seas around Asia. The ship had been properly operating for 8 years. People were delivering industrial goods to different points in the region, but something went wrong. In 2009, Sam Ratulangi was sailing near the coast of Taiwan, and that's it. There were no further records about it. There were no reports in any port. Everyone thought it must have drowned, so no one had been looking for it for years. And then, 9 years later, it appears here, big and rusty, off the coast of Myanmar, without sailors, without fuel. An investigation starts. City services are trying to find out the names of all the sailors working on the ship and find clues that would lead to solving this mystery. They also hope the ship owner will appear soon. They find 2 tow ropes on board. This means that some other ship towed Sam Ratulangi to this place. Then they identify and find 13 crew members. These people say they wanted to reach the factory in Bangladesh to repair Sam Ratulangi. Another vessel helped tow the ship, but then 2 cables tore off, and a storm began. No one wanted to stay on board during such weather, so the crew members left it. No one knows what the ship has been doing for the last 9 years, and how it was possible without people on board. And here's another, much more mysterious ship story. On February 16th, 2020, locals found a large cargo ship stuck on a rocky shore off the coast of an Irish village. The boat looked rusty, with holes in the hull and rotten parts. People hadn't seen this vessel the day before, so it appeared there at night. The last time people saw the Alta cargo ship was a few months earlier, thousands of miles off the coast of Ireland. That day, the Alta was sailing in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Another ship, the MS Protector, noticed it. MS Protector crew members tried to contact the ship, but received no response. The people on board realized that they were facing an empty vessel. And then, 5 months later, it appeared near the coast of Ireland. There are more questions than answers in this story, but we managed to find something out. In 2015, the Alta appeared and disappeared from the radar several times. Any ship has an internal tracking system so people can track its route using satellites. But Alta crew members often disabled this system. Perhaps they were engaged in some illegal activity. Anyway, in 2017, the ship often sailed between the ports of Greek islands. Then, the tracking signal disappeared and appeared only 10 months later, off the coast of North Africa. During this time, the ship changed several flags. In September 2018, the Alta was southeast of Bermuda and headed for Haiti. Then, the crew started facing problems. First, the main engine failed right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The ship began to drift. Several days passed, but the crew members weren't able to repair it. They began to run out of food and water supplies. The situation got even worse when they found out that a hurricane was approaching the place. Fortunately, they managed to contact the U.S. Coast Guard. A helicopter flew to the Alta on October 2nd to bring them some supplies. There was enough food for several days. Then, a rescue boat sailed to the ship. It evacuated all the sailors and delivered them to Puerto Rico before the hurricane. The Alta had to drift alone in the ocean. After a while, another ship approached the Alta to tow it to the shores of Guyana. But at this moment, everything went wrong. Someone stole the boat, disabled the tracking system, and sailed away in an unknown direction. After almost a year, the MS Protector found the empty Alta in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. And then, 9 months later, the ship without a crew sailed to the shores of Ireland. How did it manage to travel across the Atlantic and get to the coast of Ireland? It's still a mystery. Maybe it was just luck. No one else saw the ship all this time. It was just covering huge distances, surviving storms. Who's the captain? What happened to the thieves? Who owns the ship now? One day, someone called the village administration and introduced themselves as the vessel owner. But that unknown person didn't provide any evidence. They found several barrels of oil on the ship, which they took away by helicopter. The Alta was rusting. Corrosion of metal could damage the environment. The vessel had no commercial value, yet it would have taken millions to get rid of it. There were 3 options for what to do: leave the ship where it was, tow it into the sea and let it sink, or disassemble it for scrap. But nature had its own plans. Storms and strong waves split the hull into 2 parts. The Alta was drifting without a crew in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean for about 2 years. But this is nothing compared to a ship that was traveling for 38 years. The record belongs to the SS Bimo. It was a merchant vessel owned by some trading company. In 1931, the ship found itself on the ice off the coast of Alaska. Its movement slowed down. A thick layer of ice blocked the ship, and a strong storm only made the situation worse. The blizzard was so intense that the crew members couldn't see anything but a white veil in front of their eyes. Sailing any further was impossible. The team had to wait for the storm to end. They waited for a day, 2, 3 days. A week had passed, but the snowstorm was only getting stronger. Then, one day, it grew weaker. The crew members split into 2 teams. The first team went to the nearest city. The second group, along with the captain, stayed on board. They set up camp next to the ship and waited for the blizzard, which had started again, to end. There was 0 visibility. And finally, one day, the storm was over. Great! And now, wait a minute. But where is the ship? The SS Bimo just disappeared during the blizzard. The captain was sure that the ship had sunk, so he left along with the crew. Then, a week later, they saw the vessel drifting near the area where they had lost it. The hull was damaged so severely that it was unsafe to sail on it. Repairing the ship would be pointless and expensive, so the captain decided to abandon it. He was sure that it would go underwater sooner or later, but it stayed afloat for the next few days, the next few months, and a few years. People had reported seeing it at various points along the coast of Alaska for 38 years. The last record of the SS Bimo is dated 1969. Those who saw it claimed the ship was completely frozen, almost merged with the ice. Some people planned to start an expedition to find the ship, but all attempts were unsuccessful. The vessel is probably lying somewhere on the deep sea floor.
Thick fog is rising over the ocean as the sun is slowly sinking towards the horizon. It's hard to see further away than a few dozen feet, but that's enough to notice a hulking, skeletal shape in the distance. As your ship approaches the figure, your heart beats faster, and then you make out the details of another vessel, abandoned by the looks of it. Ghost ships do exist, and their mysteries aren't always solved. Take MV Hoita, for example. It was a wooden vessel built in 1931 as a luxury yacht. It had served well to various people over 20 years before it was bought by a Samoan sailor and became a merchant ship. In 1955, though, Hoita's service came to an abrupt and mysterious end. On October 3rd, it set sail for another trading voyage that should have taken no more than 48 hours. Delays happen in the sea, so when Hoita didn't arrive on October 5th as scheduled, there was little worry yet. But then it failed to come on the following day too. There was no distress signal or any other sign of Hoita's presence anywhere between its departure and arrival points. A search and rescue party was dispatched to find the ship, and for 6 days, they were scouting the area of nearly 100,000 square miles. On October 12th, the mission returned to the base empty-handed. Hoita vanished without a trace. It was only a month later that another merchant ship, Tuvalu, noticed the missing vessel far away from its route, drifting in the open sea and listing heavily. The sailors boarded the ship and found that all of its crew and passengers, 25 people total, were missing, along with all the cargo the vessel had been carrying. The radio was tuned to the International Distress Channel, meaning that the crew had been trying to ask for help, but they couldn't reach anyone because the radio cable had been damaged, limiting the range to 2 miles. The lifeboats were missing as well, indicating that people on board must have left the ship. Unfortunately, they seem to have taken the logbook with them, leaving the rescue team clueless as to what had happened. Even today, the mystery of MV Hoita hasn't been solved yet. No one knows where the crew and passengers had gone and what had caused them to leave. SV Carol A. Deering wasn't a ghost ship in the usual sense of the word. There were no sightings of it in the open sea. Instead, it was found on the shore, but the circumstances of it running aground are a puzzle shrouded in mystery. Carol A. Deering was built in 1919 in Maine, and it was a large vessel made for commercial voyages. Unfortunately, despite its large cost of construction, it had only served for a year before its last trip. July 19th, 1920. The ship was traveling from Puerto Rico to Rio de Janeiro via Newport News to deliver a cargo of coal. It was almost halfway to the final destination when the captain fell seriously ill, and the crew turned back to drop him and his son off and replace the captain. The voyage went without incident, but when it came to Barbados in December to resupply, there were strange moods among the crew. The first mate didn't seem to be happy with the new captain. No one paid much attention to it back then, when they probably should have. The last sighting of Carol A. Deering at sea was on January 28, 1921, when a lightship noticed it off the coast of North Carolina. There was some commotion on the quarterdeck of the ship, where the crew were normally not allowed. Then, another vessel sighted it, but there was already no one on the decks. On January 31st, the merchant ship was found hard aground in the Diamond Shoals, a site notorious for numerous shipwrecks that had been occupying there for centuries. When the search and rescue party boarded the ship, they found it abandoned, the log and personal belongings of the crew gone, along with the 2 lifeboats. There is still no answer to what happened on board of Carol A. Deering that January, although the most popular version was mutiny. Maybe we'll never find out the truth though. SS Bimo is perhaps one of the most notable ghost ships in history. This large cargo steamer was built in 1914 in Sweden and plodded its way dutifully over 16 years, trading provisions for pelts with native tribes of Alaska and Canada. But then, on October 1st, 1931, Bechimo got caught in pack ice. At first, it seemed the crew would be able to wait it out and continue on their route because the ship broke free in a couple of days. But in less than a week, it became caught again, this time for good. In another week, a rescue party was sent to fetch 22 of the Bechimo's crew, while another 15 remained behind to wait through the winter if necessary and get the ship back. But a month later, after a powerful blizzard struck their camp, the sailors went out of their shelters only to find the ship gone. Luckily, a few days later, a native hunter told the Bechimo hadn't been lost yet. He'd seen it about 45 miles from where they had been stationed. They managed to track it down, but decided the ship wouldn't survive the winter. So they took the most valuable cargo from its hold and abandoned it. They were wrong though. SS Bechimo did survive that winter, and many more that followed. When the ice broke, it sailed away on its own, drifting listlessly along the shores of Canada and Alaska. There were numerous sightings of the ghost ship, sometimes adrift in the open sea, and at other times stuck in the pack ice again. People attempted to board and salvage it, but weather conditions or lack of equipment always prevented them. SS Bechimo was last sighted by native Alaskans in 1969, 38 years after its abandonment. What became of it later remains unknown. The story of SS Orang Medan is one of the most puzzling and harrowing ghost ship stories of the 20th century. No one even knows for sure if the ship even existed in the first place. It wasn't recorded in Lloyd's Shipping, the International Register of Ships, which makes it either a tall tale or a vessel that avoided being officially recognized for some shady reasons. In any case, the accounts as to what happened to the Medan vary. According to most reports, it was carrying some unknown cargo in the Indonesian waters when a distress call was received by another ship in the vicinity. The officer on duty heard an SOS message, but its contents are different depending on the accounts. The message did not repeat, and the crew of Medan didn't answer to any attempts to contact it back. The ship that received the distress call hurried to the rescue, but they only reached the vessel the following day, when it was already drifting and slightly listing. When the rescuers boarded the ship, they found that none of the crew had survived. However, one lifeboat was missing, which implied that there was at least one crew member who managed to escape. What happened to the rest of the people on board remains a mystery to this day. Still, there are no hard facts about this story, so we might never find out whether SS Orang Medan was actually a ship and not a thing of fiction. SV Sabrina was a three-mast sailing barge built in 1873 for river trade ships in South America. She served for well over 4 decades, proving to be a sturdy and reliable ship. It was later transferred to Europe, where it continued serving its purpose well. But then, in October 1917, Sabrina set sail on a regular voyage only to be found ashore several days later. Mysteriously, although the ship was perfectly intact, the entire crew of 5 and the captain were gone. There is no direct evidence or hard facts as to what really happened that day. The most convincing theory is that the crew were washed away from the deck because of an underwater explosion. And then the ship sailed ahead without them. But the truth, as always, remains unknown.
A lot of weird incidents have happened in the mysterious valley of Haizu ever since the 1950s. People even started comparing it to the infamous Bermuda Triangle. But are they really that similar? It all started when an airplane went missing here under circumstances no one can explain yet. They searched the location back and forth, but nothing appeared to have remained of the aircraft. And guess what? No one received any SOS messages from the team on board. And to top it off, the same year, a considerable number of tourists and local residents were lost here in the valley, never to be seen again. Speaking of the Bermuda Triangle, one can link its origin story to a series of mysterious disappearances of ships and aircraft, like the one that happened in 1945, when 5 planes and 14 people on board went missing in this location while doing routine training exercises. Even a thorough investigation didn't help to establish the cause of the incident. But that wasn't the end. Between 1945 and the mid-1980s, another 25 small planes went missing while going through the Bermuda Triangle, never to be seen again. And the search parties haven't recovered a single piece of these aircraft. The Bermuda Triangle isn't the only stretch of water that has claimed ships for good. In the Pacific Ocean, near Japan, there's a tricky portion of water that has earned the nickname the Devil's Sea. The best known out of all of these disappearances is that of a fishery patrol vessel that went missing in 1953. On board were 31 crew members and scientists who were looking to investigate a recently formed volcanic island. What happened to the ship and all the people on board? We'll never know, I guess, since they never found the ship or the crew members, and there was literally no trace of them left behind. Back in 1911, a standard train was scheduled to depart from a railway station in Rome, hoping to reach the city of Milan. Needless to say, none of the 106 passengers ever made it to the destination, and no one has ever seen them again. What happened to these people and to their train? Were they really lost forever? Some people seem to believe this isn't the case. As it was completing its journey, the train was supposed to pass through a long tunnel. It did enter it, but never came out the other end of the tunnel. Nothing was left of the train, and it seemed like it literally just vanished into thin air. Only 2 of the passengers were found, but they were quite unwell at the time, and their stories did not seem to make much sense. They spoke of a dense fog that they simply jumped out of because they got so scared. 15 years later, a story spread about a group of 104 Italian people that popped up in Mexico City, claiming they had arrived by train from Rome. If that's not weird enough, the story appears to have been reported back in 1845, 66 years before the train even departed in the first place. Of course, nobody at the time actually took these people seriously, but you can't help but wonder, did they actually time travel via the Roman tunnel, or is it just another urban myth? What do you think? The Lost Colony is the story of a strange phenomenon that happened back in the late 1500s. A group of people from England had moved into a colony on Roanoke Island off the coast of present-day North Carolina. But they soon realized they didn't have enough supplies. To fix this, the colony's governor decided to head back to England to get some. He didn't manage to come back for another 3 years. When he finally did, he was astonished at what was left behind. Nothing. The entire population of the colony was gone. The only reminder of what had been there was a single word carved into a tree. To this day, nobody knows what might have happened to these people or what the carved word means. A lighthouse without an operator? You might think that can't possibly be true, but hear me out. Located in the northwestern part of Scotland are the Flannan Isles. There's nothing fancy about them since they're nothing more than a bunch of rocks and grass. But there is a famous lighthouse here hiding a dark secret. In 1900, all 3 of the lighthouse's keepers mysteriously disappeared, never to be seen again. Ever since, the islands have been completely abandoned. The lighthouse became one of those with an automated system in the 1970s. No list of places where things go missing could be complete without this mysterious forest located in Transylvania, a region in Romania. And no, it has nothing to do with the famous Count Dracula, if that's what you're thinking. It's called the Hoya Forest, and it's a place that has seen quite its share of unusual phenomena. Not only do people go missing here, but others have experienced all sorts of weird noises, from female voices to whispers. Some people claim to have time traveled between the spooky trees of the Hoya Forest. They say they had literally skipped a few hours before they went back. The Yellowhead Highway is a stretch of road located in British Columbia, Canada. One section of the road has received a lot of attention throughout the years, starting with the 1960s because of some mysterious disappearances. These events have earned it the nickname Highway of Tears. There is no reasonable explanation as to why people keep going missing here. What is more striking is that most of these people were young women. This triangular area that stretches above the desert and the Sierra Nevada mountains in the state of Nevada received quite a bit of attention because of a disappearance that happened back in 2007. A record-setting sailor, aviator, and adventurer named Steve Fawcett flew here in a small plane and then disappeared. They searched for Fawcett intensively for months, but didn't find any traces of him or the aircraft. 1 year later, the mystery of Fawcett's fate was finally solved when a hiker came across his ID cards, and later a search party found the plane's wreckage. It's one of the most visited natural resorts in the world, but Yosemite National Park carries some dark secrets of its own. Despite its beauty and abundance of wildlife, a total of 45 people went missing right here in this location. No one knows what happened to them. Hey, maybe we should ask the local bears. They might know something. There are even stories of people that disappeared from one region of the park only to pop up in a completely different location. This hasn't stopped over 3 million people that visit the park each year from wandering around this location, though. Whenever a ship happens to sink, you'd expect to at least find pieces of it on the bottom of the sea, right? Well, not if you're traveling through Lake Superior. It's located along the border of the United States and Canada, and became famous because of the great number of ships that went missing here. It may have something to do with the stormy winds, of course, but that doesn't explain why some ships simply vanish altogether, without a single piece of them ever to be found, not even at the bottom of the lake. It does gather a lot of tourists each year, though. They come here to scuba dive and see the remains of some of the ships that still lie here. The bottom of this lake even contains what's left of the notorious SS Edmund Fitzgerald. Back when it departed on June 7, 1958, it was the largest ship on North America's Great Lakes and, to this day, remains the largest ship ever to have sunk in the area. Similar to other events, the exact cause of the shipwreck remains a mystery.
The theory of parallel worlds has been discussed in the scientific community for a very long time. Unfortunately, we're not developed enough yet to prove or disprove it. But it's still an interesting theory, and that's why we have a lot of unusual urban legends about the guests from a parallel reality, according to many. Let's check out a few of them. A man from a non-existent country. This story took place in 1851 in a small German village, Frankfurt an der Oder. A lost man came out to the local villagers asking for help. The man introduced himself as Jopar Voren. He spoke very poor German and had a very strong accent. The man himself claimed that he speaks Laxar and Abram, languages that don't actually exist on our Earth. He claimed to be from Laxaria, a country on the mainland called Sacria, separated from Europe by a huge ocean. However, none of these places existed on the Earth's map. People sent Jopar to the local authorities. He talked to a psychiatrist, but the doctor concluded that the man was totally sane. An investigation by the local police also revealed nothing suspicious about him. Jopar Voren claimed that the purpose of his visit to Europe was to find his long-lost brother. He survived a shipwreck and found himself near the village. They showed him a map of the world and a globe and asked him to indicate the place where he crashed, but he didn't recognize anything familiar. He seemed to have extensive knowledge about his homeworld. Jopar named 5 main continents on it: Sacria, Aflar, Astar, Auslar, and Uplar. His story was considered plausible. Scientists from Frankfurt decided to send the man to Berlin for further research. However, during the trip, he had something like a seizure. The man suddenly jumped out of the carriage and disappeared into the surrounding forest. Despite a long and thorough search, no traces of Jopar were found. He seemed to have disappeared as mysteriously as he had appeared. Inspector LeBouf, who was assigned to escort him to Berlin, thought this man could be a being from another world, and that he had returned from where he had come from. Lady on Highway 167. This incident happened on October 20th, 1969. It was first reported in 1988 in the magazine Strange. The article tells about 2 men, LC and his business partner, Charlie. The names are fictitious. One afternoon, Elsie and Charlie were driving along Highway 167 in southwest Louisiana. Discussing work, they drove toward the oil center of Lafayette. The highway was empty at first, but then the men noticed a very old and very slow car ahead. The men started discussing this mysterious car. Such cars hadn't been produced for several decades, but this one looked quite new. The men thought it was thanks to the owner's care and admired it. They slowed down to get a better look at the car. LC noticed a bright orange sign on it that said 1940. They saw a driver. It was a young woman in old-fashioned clothes, a hat with a long feather and a fur coat, even though it was warm outside. There was a child next to her, also dressed in a warm coat and a hat. LC and Charlie wanted to talk to her, but then they noticed the expression on her face. The woman was looking around in panic, almost on the verge of crying. LC called out to her and asked if she needed help. She nodded, and he gestured for her to park on the side of the road. But when the men also parked, they suddenly noticed that the woman's car had disappeared. They looked around the highway in shock. She couldn't have gone somewhere far so fast, but the car was nowhere to be found. After some time, another man drove up to LC and Charlie. He saw everything that happened and claimed that the car had simply disappeared. The men talked about the incident for several hours. When they reached the city, they contacted the police. However, the police couldn't help them in any way. Apart from their words, there was no confirmation of the existence of the car. The case was discussed for a while in local newspapers, and then was forgotten. The Gadianton Canyon Incident. This incident occurred in May of 1972 in southeastern Utah near the Modena Railroad crossing on the edge of the Escalante Desert. Jenna North was driving her father's 1971 Chevrolet Nova. Her friend, Carol Abbott, was in the passenger seat. In the back seat, there were two other girls, Lisa Rockford and Bethany Gordon. It was after 10 p.m. when the girls crossed the Utah-Nevada state line. They wanted to get back to campus before their housekeeper, Mrs. Mortensen, locked the dorm doors. This stretch of Highway 56 in Utah is pretty deserted. There's nothing there but sand and a few plants. The girls were very happy when they finally noticed the Union Pacific Railroad crossing in Modena. But right behind the railing, Jenna noticed two highways. One went into the desert, and the other to Gadianton Canyon. The girls decided to take the road to the canyon. They thought it would be a shortcut to campus. The other girls were chatting with each other when Jenna noticed that they were no longer driving on asphalt, but on white cement. "Watch out!" suddenly shouted one of the girls. The road ended abruptly at a high rock wall. It was a dead end. They had to go back the same way they came here. And while Jenna's friends were complaining that now they would have to sleep in the car, Jenna saw that the landscape had changed dramatically. They weren't in the desert anymore. Instead, the canyon turned into an open area with wheat fields, pine thickets, and a small lake ahead. A full moon was shining in the sky, which was strange because it shouldn't have been there that night. The girls had no idea where they were, so they just drove to the light ahead. It was some building that they thought was a diner or restaurant. The girls saw a bright neon sign, but none of them could read what was written on it. These symbols were unlike any language they knew. Suddenly, several people came out of the building. They seemed shocked and frightened by Jenna's Chevrolet. They waved their hands and shouted something, but the girls didn't understand them. Lisa decided to ask the men for directions. She stuck her head out of the window and immediately let out a terrifying scream. "Get out of here!" she shouted to Jenna. The Chevrolet sped away from the building. Bright headlights illuminated their car from behind. They were being chased by a few vehicles. These vehicles were egg-shaped, had 3 wheels, and made a buzzing sound. The road ahead led back to the canyon. Jenna didn't have time to slow down and crashed right into it. The vehicles had disappeared, together with an unfamiliar landscape. The girls were back in the desert again. Fortunately, none of them were hurt, physically. But Lisa was in a state of shock. She was saying again and again, "They weren't human!" The girls had to help her walk. An hour later, they were able to stop a Utah Highway Patrol car. They told the police their story. The details of the report compiled by the police officer were complicated and confusing. During the investigation, the police couldn't figure out from the tire tracks exactly where the car went astray. The tracks ended very abruptly, as if the Chevrolet had suddenly disappeared. The police couldn't explain how the car could have driven 2 miles without leaving any traces, especially on such solid ground. There are still disputes about this story, but in the end, all versions and explanations of what happened are just guesses. Perhaps we'll never find out the truth. These were the urban legends about interdimensional traveling. Of course, there's no proof that any of these stories are real. Often the truth turns out to be very mundane. For example, the famous man from Taured, who people also called a guest from another reality, turned out to be a simple fraudster named John Allen Kuchar Zegrus. But even so, these stories are still very interesting.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.